Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Chen Ming walked towards the small building. When he walked past Chen Yan and pushed open the door of the small building, he asked, "What do you want to do?" Chen Yan walked around Chen Ming sideways, walked in front of him and said, "I just want to show you my past and tell you what you are facing. I am already dead, so there is no need to be wary of a dead person like me, right? You don't look like a dead person. If you feel it carefully, you will know that I am really a dead person." Chen Ming didn't say much and entered the small building. And dirty was the first impression the small building gave him. Stains can be seen everywhere, and various furniture with no signs of cleaning are arranged in a mess on the first floor. Chen Yan also had some disgust in his eyes when he saw these things, and took Chen Ming straight to the attic. When passing the stairwell, Chen Ming could see that there were several different types of card tables on the second and third floors of the small building. The scattered piles of cards, overturned teapots, cigarette butts, and garbage on the ground are the main tones of the second and third floors. It was not until Chen Ming entered the attic that he could feel that the environment had improved significantly. However, there were still various debris piled up in the attic, making the entire space station look very narrow. And there was only a small window in the corner of the attic, making the entire attic very dark. Chen Ming soon noticed that next to the small window, there was a small bed that a 13 or 14-year-old child could only lie down on by hunching over. Chen Yan came to the small window with ease, opened the small window, and sat on the bed. "Seeing these, you probably know what I was like before," Chen Yan said. Opened the drawer of the small bedside table next to it, which was probably used as a desk, and fumbled inside. "When I was a child, I experienced a lot of domestic violence and was treated badly by my father. At that time, my only entertainment was to play this with my peers nearby." Chen Yan finally took out a transparent plastic jar from the drawer, which was filled with colorful glass beads. That is the external manifestation of Chen Yan's spiritual power. "I picked up my first glass bead, and I won all the others myself. Winning glass beads from other people made me happy, but my father couldn't stand it. So one day he scattered all the glass beads on the road outside." Chen Yan pointed out the window. Chen Ming leaned over to take a look. Opposite this row of small buildings was a road, and next to the road was a fairly large grassland, all covered with dense weeds, and beyond that was a river. Chen Ming turned his gaze back and continued to listen to Chen Yan's story. "That day, my happiness was gone. I didn't notice it when I got home. It wasn't until I finished my homework, had dinner, and cleaned up the house that I realized my glass beads were missing. I didn't dare to ask my father, so I just looked for them myself. Finally, I found a few of my glass beads in the weeds across the street. I spent a lot of time picking up the glass beads, but there were still a lot missing, and it was already late at night. When I got home, my father was furious and smashed the jar full of glass beads I picked up directly on my head. What I heard before I passed out was the sound of glass beads scattered all over the floor. When I woke up the next day, I was surprised to find that all the glass beads had been collected. All of them were placed in this jar. I thought my father had figured it out, but I soon found out that I was wrong. He meant for me to throw these things into the river with my own hands. I didn't want to, so I was only insulted and beaten. In the end, he dragged me, who had been beaten to the point of being unable to move, and used my hands to pour the glass beads into the river. I kept crying, which annoyed him a little, so in the end, he even forced me to eat a glass bead that didn't fall into the river. He threw me by the river like a dead dog, and I only heard the last two words he said before he left: waste." Chen Yan's tone was flat, as if he was not talking about his own past, but the story of a stranger. When I woke up the next day, I was already in the hospital, and the glass bead in my stomach had been taken out. This glass bead happened to be the first glass bead I picked up. What a coincidence, right? I took this only remaining glass bead back home. I apologized to my father, admitted my fault, and pretended to be a reformer. I broke off my friendship with friends who played with glass beads, and pretended not to touch glass beads again. I studied hard in school, and tried hard to learn from those good kids in the eyes of others, learn their advantages, make myself a collection of advantages, and pretend to be what everyone wants to see. During that time, I tried hard to prove that I was not a waste. I did it, but it was useless. Everything I showed was useless. My father still treats me like a beast, and people around me can't interfere with my family. But I'm still pretending. At least this way I can suffer less physical pain when I go home. Although this didn't affect him from beating me to the point where I couldn't move after drinking, Chen Ming said, raising his head and shifting his gaze from the can on his lap to Chen Ming's face. Then he saw Chen Ming leaning against the window with his head tilted, looking like he was listening to nonsense. Hey, I'm dead. Can't you listen to a dead person's explanation? You're all dead. Can you hurry up? I have things to do outside. You can see that time passes very slowly in this consciousness space, right? At least listen to my last words clearly. Seeing that Chen Ming still had that attitude, Chen Yin's remaining consciousness could only compromise and said, "Okay, I'll hurry up." Later, I would disguise myself further. I learned some makeup and disguise methods, disguised as a stranger, and started looking for people to play with glass beads again. I started with the only glass bead I had left, and I won more again. Not only glass beads, but also money. I hid all the glass beads in other places, and hid all the money as well. So, I was lucky enough to live to adulthood. On that day, I took a knife and took home the glass beads I had won over the years and a savings card that contained enough money to raise me from childhood. I gave the card to my father. He didn't care about the glass bead jar in my other hand at all, but only cared about the money I gave him. He praised me for the first time, and then took the money out for an afternoon. When he came back, Chen Ming suddenly interrupted. I guess he lost all the money in one afternoon, and he kept asking you for it. If you didn't give it to him, he would scold you and even want to beat you. Do you have cigarettes? Chen Ming used his mental power to create a small box of cigarettes he had seen in reality in this space and handed it to Chen Ming. Special cigarettes from the 14th Corps, good stuff. Chen Ming took out a cigarette and held it in his mouth. Chen Ming lit it for him. Chen Ming closed his eyes and took a long puff. As he slowly exhaled smoke rings, he asked, "This is a very old story, right?" "Yes." Chen Ming took another puff of cigarette and continued to tell the story calmly. He wanted to beat me and get more money from me. And after I bit off one of my own fingers, I took out a knife. I am already a strong adult. Even with my hand injured, I easily beat that drunkard, smoker, and gambler. I cut his tendons in his hands and legs, cut off his tongue that he used to scream, and put all the things I had suffered over the years into my body. I paid back all the pain I had suffered for the beatings I had suffered over the years. Finally, I stuffed all the glass beads I had won over the years into his stomach one by one, just like he had stuffed the glass beads into my stomach before. I watched the glass beads fill up his stomach and his esophagus until they could no longer be stuffed in. I was very happy. I was very satisfied. Just after he died, I awakened my psychic powers. My psychic powers can not only replicate other people's psychic powers, but I can also replicate everything about other people, including their height and appearance. Just as psychic, only then will there be a concrete product, that is, those glass beads. The specific name should be called heart-gathering spirit beads. It was quite simple for me to deal with his funeral. I just told the public that he died of drinking, and no one said anything. Anyway, he was just that kind of person. No one doubted what a good boy like me said in everyone's eyes. Later, some creditors who owed him money came to him. Of course, I could pay back the money he owed, and I did. I also killed some people who didn't have eyes to make trouble for me. I was originally planning to move to another place and start a new life. But just before I left, someone told me that my father lost too much money in gambling, and for money, he believed in Zhujiang. I was already a psychic at that time, and I knew I had the ability, so I chose to investigate Zhujiang. At that time, I found that the surface Zhujiang was just a cover, and the real Zhujiang was a powerful force hidden in the empire and funded by many parties. So I had an idea, that is, to join Zhujiang. Chen Ming's words just came out. The surrounding environment suddenly blurred for a moment, as if there was a moment of garbled code. Chen Ming did not show any reaction to this situation. but he obviously saw the changes in the surrounding environment and stopped sitting on the bed, but stood up. Just after he stood up, the surrounding environment changed completely. From the attic of the old building, it became a basement. The shape and structure are very similar to the basement of Zhujiang, which Chen Ming had stayed in, located in the basement of the cafe. Chen Ming and Chen Mian stood at the corner of the basement stairs and could clearly see the situation of the entire basement. At this time, some other people appeared around except the two of them. However, Chen Ming did not pay too much attention to these people. Instead, he looked at the deepest place. There, the young Chen Mian was sitting at a desk. And behind the desk was a person who was completely hidden in the shadows and could not be seen clearly. At this time, Chen Mian's voice beside Chen Ming also appeared some strange noises and inexplicable abrupt changes in tone. I joined Zhujiang to satisfy my crazy ideas. Question mark. Isn't this too jumpy? Chen Mian's previous performance sounded like something that a normal person who was somewhat in line with his values could do. Why did he just say that he would satisfy his crazy ideas when he joins Zhujiang? What crazy ideas? Chen Ming was just about to ask Chen Mian beside him, but suddenly he found that there was a problem with the picture in front of him again. Looking forward, there was only a piece of complete garbled code. All the people, including the young Chen Mian and the person in the shadow, disappeared, and only Chen Mian stayed beside him. What's going on? Chen Ming looked at Chen Mian. The face of Chen Mian's remaining consciousness beside him showed a lot of negative emotions such as pain, hatred, despair, anger, etc. And these complex emotions finally boiled down to one kind: resentment. Chen Mian's remaining consciousness felt that he was approaching the end. The space station built by Chen Ming's mental power could no longer protect it. So he moved. He walked into the garbled code with a heart full of resentment. All the places he passed by were restored to their original state, but the people who should have been there were gone. He walked to the desk, but did not sit in the position where the young him had just sat. Instead, he sat in the position of the person in the shadow. He looked at Chen Ming. Just when everything was about to end and the surrounding environment was completely distorted and blurred, Chen Mian's face changed. In the chaos, Chen Ming could only barely see a face clearly. A face that looked 40 or 50 years old and ordinary. But his eyes were deep and attractive. It seemed to have everything. Then, Chen Mian's consciousness completely dissipated. The last trace of existence in the world disappeared. Only the dark and empty consciousness space where Chen Ming was at the moment was left. Chen Ming did not rush to leave here, but carefully recalled what happened just now. Chen Mian was talking nonsense before, just a dying, dead person telling people about his past that he couldn't tell people, venting. The key is the last scene. Although it was just a glimpse, Chen Ming had completely memorized that face in his mind. This face must be the face of the brainwashed psychic of Zhujiang. And the last scene was imitated by Chen Mian. Chen Ming probably understood what happened to Chen Mian after he joined Zhujiang, and he also understood Chen Mian's meaning. The answer is actually very simple. Chen Mian was brainwashed. He was a psychic who had just awakened his psychic power and was a fledgling psychic. After investigating the problems of Zhujiang, he chose to join Zhujiang. Chen Mian's original intention of joining Zhujiang was definitely to destroy Zhujiang, but after joining Zhujiang, he gradually became involved with Zhujiang. It was obviously because Chen Mian's luck was not good. He was purely brainwashed and his mind was gradually changed. He only wanted to satisfy his bad thoughts that he had suppressed in the deepest part of his heart and should never appear in this life. Such a person who came out of an extreme environment after having power not only did not vent wantonly, but only resisted those who gave him pain, and was even willing to take the initiative to pay off the debts to those who demanded debts. This shows that he still maintains a stable mentality, a desire for revenge, and tolerance for civilians. He is a normal person. Such a person became a complete lunatic after joining Zhujiang. The culprit for all this can only be Zhujiang's brainwashed psychic. The face transformed by Chen Mian's residual consciousness left a deep impression on Chen Ming. He must find this person and solve this person. Right now, deep underground. Unfortunately, Chen Ming still has two questions that he didn't have time to ask. That is, How did the mental runaway entity that Chen Ming turned into die, and why Chen Ming called him a monster? When a man is about to die, his words are good. Chen Ming could feel that none of Chen Ming's words were lies. After his remaining consciousness was no longer controlled, he had been passing on news about Zhuojing to Chen Ming and should be able to answer these questions. But Chen Ming did not expect Chen Ming's consciousness to dissipate so quickly. If he had known, he would not have given him the opportunity to talk nonsense. Forget it, it's not a big problem. These two questions are his own problems, and he will figure them out sooner or later. Chen Ming left this consciousness space that was built by his mental power and Chen Ming's remaining consciousness and supported by him. After finding that he was back in the underground of the power supply tower, he took a deep breath. Plasma began to condense on his fist again. The enemies have been cleared, so the next step should be the end. But at this time, he was still thinking about Chen Ming's affairs. From Chen Ming's point of view, Chen Ming was indeed a good person, at least before he joined Zhuojing and was brainwashed, and even in some things, his three views were quite consistent with his. At that time, Chen Ming did not do anything out of line. The only people he killed were his father who abused him domestically, and those who wanted to do something to him because he was young and rich. Unfortunately, everything changed when he investigated Zhuojing and joined Zhuojing. It was because of Zhuojing's brainwashed psychic that he became like this. It's a pity. Originally, a person like Chen Ming would most likely be absorbed into the local government department after being noticed. After all, what he did before was not really evil. Of course, if the current Chen Ming was still alive, Chen Ming would definitely not let him continue to live. The current Chen Ming is indeed a complete villain. Only after he died, Chen Ming could give him a good evaluation of his past. In addition, Chen Ming actually has another pity. That is, after joining Zhuojing, Chen Ming's consciousness did not show any subsequent performance and did not continue to reveal more information to him. What Chen Ming remembered seemed to end the moment he joined Zhuojing and saw the psychic. There was nothing afterwards. There was no information about the brainwashed psychic, the location of Zhuojing's main base, or their activities over the years. Chen Ming still had to go down. The plasma on his fist was charged to the extreme. But just before he was about to swing his fist down, he suddenly found that a fist-sized stone next to him had twisted and sharply interwoven patterns and psychic fluctuations. This was a spiritual stone. The plasma on one of Chen Ming's hands was temporarily moved to the side, so that he could reach out and pick up the spiritual stone. The moment he picked it up, Chen Ming felt extremely strong resentment from the spiritual stone. This was the spiritual stone left by Chen Ming. Chen Ming's last strand of psychic fluctuations that had been consciously separated from the control of the brainwashed psychic turned into a resentful spiritual stone. When Chen Ming held the resentful spiritual stone tightly, an illusion naturally appeared in front of his eyes. An illusion of a brainwashed psychic who killed Zhuojing. This is also a resonant spiritual stone. Really, it's hard to say anything. Chen Ming put away the spiritual stone and continued to go down. The recipient below should be the brainwashed psychic. Find him and kill him. This is what he will do next. As long as he can kill him, perhaps the Zhuojing force will gradually die out under the siege of the empire. Chen Ming continued to collapse the ground of the power tower and continued to move forward to the underground where the psychic fluctuations were still spreading. At the same time, the main battleship of the 5th Legion in the sky finally brought its fleet to the edge of the Lucy Galaxy. This is an ordinary offensive-class heavy battleship with extremely strong armor performance and attack capabilities. After coordinating the 5th Legion fleet that had been waiting for a long time, it sailed into the galaxy and headed towards the Prometheus class of Zhuojing. The battle between the main fleets is not something that the cruisers and the fleets below can intervene in, but there is no problem watching from a distance. So at this time, Chen Ming's Yuhui fleet and some fleets of other forces gathered at the edge of the galaxy to watch everything that was about to happen in the galaxy. I saw that the 5th Army's offensive activated the linked shield according to the normal process. The lower-level spacecraft gradually arranged into a formation for the upcoming battle. Although for some reason the 5th Army's fleet had no advantage in terms of the number of spacecraft compared to Zhuojing's fleet. But the people of the 5th Army are better than those brainwashed and mixed fleets by Zhuojing, right? and at the moment when the fleets of both sides entered the range of the main battleship, the exciting thing that should have happened did not happen. The main weapons of the two battleships were not activated, and they did not bombard each other. Instead, they continued to approach, as if they were going to fight with the lower-level spaceships. This is normal. The battle between the main fleets can rely on the battle between the lower-level spaceships to gain the overall advantage on the battlefield and save the battle preparation for the main battleships. When the lower-level fleets gain the advantage, it is also a reasonable tactic to rely on a large number of lower-level spaceships with linked shields to surround the enemy's battleships from multiple directions. However, all those who are paying attention to this battlefield will obviously not see that the situation will happen as expected. Especially Chen Ming, who is going deep underground and continuing to observe the battlefield outside, thinks of the words that the president said to him before. Things may not go so smoothly. After the two fleets of the Fifth Army and Zhujiang finally entered the battle range of each other's cruiser-level warships, the Fifth Army, which should have relied on the strength of its main battleships and subordinate fleets, did not launch a full-scale attack directly for some reason. Instead, it chose to advance slowly. The commander of the Fifth Army was very cautious, even a little too cautious. He kept commanding the fleet at the edge of the battle line, showing his superb command skills, and made the Zhujiang fleet, which did not have a good enough commander and was a mixed fleet, run around in circles. The fleet of the Fifth Army could easily destroy a large number of mixed fleets. The overall situation was also tilting towards the Fifth Army. But the situation on this battlefield was somehow very tense. The crushing situation was made extremely difficult by the Fifth Army. And just when the subordinate ships of the Fifth Army fleet had almost beaten the number of Zhujiang's subordinate ships, they suddenly chose to retreat. The Fifth Army had to regroup and did not choose to finish the battle in one wave. From Chen Ming's perspective, it looked like the result would come out after a while. The Fifth Army's losses were not that great. Even if all the people on the fleet belonging to Zhujiang were brainwashed, and all of them fought to the death, the Fifth Army could not lose at all just by relying on the increasing exchange ratio, and it could not suffer much loss. Even if Zhujiang's Prometheus class wanted to resist Chen Ming, he did not believe that the Prometheus, a battleship originally intended for fuel and material transportation, could be better than an offensive class ship originally used by the army to resist the front line on a large-scale front battlefield after being modified by a ship engineer in a star field who was brainwashed by Zhujiang. Moreover, as far as Chen Ming knew, the Prometheus class was a battleship developed by governments of different star fields after being approved by the Empire. Its data must have been in the hands of relevant parties for a long time. No matter how much such a ship is modified, the framework is there. Why should the army be afraid of such a ship? But the Fifth Army did just that, and it looked like it did not dare to fight Prometheus head-on. Chen Ming could guess the reason. Because just when the two fleets were exchanging fire, some of the small and medium-sized spacecraft belonging to the 5th Legion bypassed the Prometheus-class protective net in combat mode and arrived at Yanluo Star from the other side of the planet. When seeing this scene, Chen Ming had completely understood the 5th Legion's idea. It is obvious that the 5th Legion's goal is not to deal with Zhujiang's fleet, but to use Zhujiang's fleet as another layer of protective net. In this way, their own people can go to the surface of Yanluo Star, find Zhujiang's recipient, and take the power from the recipient. They have the ability to deal with Zhujiang's fleet, but they just don't do it. They want more. Chen Ming was also a little uncomfortable at this time, because the 5th Legion seemed to treat dimensional infection as something casual. Obviously, the harm caused by dimensional infection has been placed in front of everyone, but there are still people who do some things that make people bleed in vain for this power that may not be obtained and may have extremely serious sequelae. This makes people feel very uncomfortable. Especially Chen Ming's goal from the beginning was to solve this trouble, not to seize that power. He could have stayed out of this. The Kamo Star region is far away from his current location. If he didn't come, no one would say anything, and no one would even think of him. But he still came here because Zhujiang created a dimensional infection, and using the power of dimensional infection might threaten the Empire and the survival of the entire human race. He traced the source all the way, provided intelligence to the president, found the source of Zhujiang's trouble, and killed 2 important senior officials of Zhujiang. He was about to arrive in front of Zhujiang's recipient, and was only one step away from solving this trouble. He worked hard here. As a result, someone behind him was not sober. Even if the Fifth Army rushed over and destroyed the Zhujiang fleet, and then the main weapons plowed the entire planet and killed Wuping, Chen Ming would not feel so bad now. Even the Fifth Army was a little more direct, crushing Zhujiang head-on, and then the fleet pressed into Yunluo in large numbers, showing an attitude of completely wiping out Zhujiang. Chen Ming would not have the same idea as now, but the Fifth Army's approach really disappointed him. At the same time, it also made him feel the same as when the president told him about this matter before. Chen Ming finally couldn't help it, and the fake body of the 14th Army immediately called the president and said, "President, I understand what you mean. The Fifth Army's main battleships were sent out to seize Zhujiang's power, not to deal with Zhujiang. But wasn't their original purpose to deal with it? Are there already disagreements within the Fifth Legion?" When the president heard this question, he stopped sorting out the documents and said to Chen Ming attentively, "They did have disagreements. Because they suffered heavy losses in this operation. Zhujiang should have started planning this recent matter a long time ago. As the nearest independent legion with a base in the nearby star field, the Fifth Legion was naturally targeted by Zhujiang's brainwashed psychic. Your fleets are all near several key star systems, and you should be able to see how heavy their losses are. They need compensation, so they want to seize the power of dimensional infection. You have also seen what Zhujiang's psychic can do after he has certain abilities. If this ability can be obtained by the Fifth Legion, then they may even rely on that person to become a legion on par with the 14th Legion. So they did it, and even forbade others to intervene, including me." Chen Ming still felt something was wrong, because he remembered that the president said before he went to do business that he was going to deal with this matter in Kamo Starfield. The reason why the president could temporarily put aside his support for the Fifth Army and go to work was either because the Fifth Army took the initiative to ask the president to stop temporarily, or because of the Empire's request. After returning, the Empire classified this incident as a rebellion, which proves that it was the Empire that called the president over, and the Fifth Army was definitely involved. What is the Empire's attitude? The Empire just let the Fifth Legion do it? The Empire's attitude is to wait and see. The president said, because now, the location of the psychic in Zhujiang who is mastering the power of dimensional infection has been determined. It is in the Lucy Galaxy, Yunluo star. Since the location has been confirmed, there are already several psychics at the same level as me and Wuan who are watching there. They are confident that they can take action to solve the problem when necessary. Now this matter is no longer something we can interfere with. It was the Empire that acquiesced to the Fifth Legion using ordinary people on the entire planet and those psychics on it in exchange for a dimensional infection power controlled by the Empire. I don't want to say anything, but I can only say that the power of dimensional infection is definitely not something that can be easily controlled. The power of dimensional infection is really too strong. Even if this power can only act on a large range and cannot enhance the psychic effect, it doesn't matter. It has its value to the Empire. You should know that Yu Hui has no resistance to anything related to psychic power, right? Chen Ming was very clear about the president's point. For Yu Hui, any kind of spiritual stone, psychic fluctuation, even if it is neutral, even if it is only very weak, will cause a bunch of redundant data to be added to the logic code running by Yu Hui as long as it is exposed. If there is a psychic who can apply psychic fluctuations to Yu Hui's territory, except Chen Ming himself, then this psychic may also be fatal to Yu Hui. Such a psychic may be able to solve Yu Hui, one of the main enemies of the Empire at present. This is the reason why the Empire is willing to watch and let the Fifth Legion seize this power. Even if Chen Ming is sitting in the chair of the Empire, he has to seriously consider this power. Of course, Chen Ming will never gamble in the end. The reason is also very simple. What if it fails? Don't they know what the consequences of failure will be? The president's mental state is almost the same as Chen Ming's at this time. He said to Chen Ming, "Of course they know, so they will prepare psychics with sufficient ability as the final insurance. What if it can't be solved? The psychic with brainwashing ability in Zhujiang has the power of dimensional infection, and the entire empire may be brainwashed. They said there will be a deadline, and they will take action directly when the deadline is reached, and will not give Zhuojing a chance to continue. Just this one sentence? Just this one sentence. Not everyone has awe for dimensional infection. To be honest, Chen Ming can't accept this situation. If it was a normal situation, he might really accept it, and he might really believe that the Empire can definitely solve Zhuojing's troubles. But the attitude shown by the Fifth Legion made him lose trust in the Fifth Legion. He didn't even trust the Empire. Is there no one who can stop it? The president's words were full of helplessness. Who else can come? I can't go. Wuan can't go, and our psychic society has been excluded. Unless you think Hui can solve this problem, it seems that there is really no one in the Lucy galaxy who can solve the problem. Hui has already arrived in Lucy? Yes, he has been a traitor, and his identity is still a member of Zhuojing in the eyes of others. But do you really want to count on him? Then forget it. The boss had said before that when Hui was impersonated by Zhuojing to assassinate him, the first person he went to was the president. So it was normal for the president to know that Hui had gone to Zhuojing to be a traitor. But Chen Ming was very worried about Hu Yi's ability. There was nothing wrong with his psychic power, but for some reason he couldn't think straight when doing things. Chen Ming seriously suspected that his IQ was converted into entropy and used up by him. Although the boss had been guiding him, the effect didn't seem to be very ideal. Anyway, Chen Ming couldn't trust Hu Yi. The president was the same. So the president just mentioned it casually, and then thought about whether there was any way to directly solve Zhuojing's troubles instead of letting the Fifth Legion gamble on the possibility of snatching power from Zhuojing. He soon thought of another person. Actually, there is another person who might be able to help, Whooping. And Whooping? The mess in Chen Ming's mind suddenly seemed to be sorted out. Yes, why should he consider others? Since he can solve this problem by himself, why should he rely on others? The people of the Fifth Legion came later than him, and he was fully capable of completely solving the dimensional infection before they arrived, and before they tried to obtain the power of dimensional infection. The president didn't notice anything unusual about Chen Ming, and continued to say, Whooping's strength is a little bit weaker, but at least his goal has always been to deal with Zhuojing. Plus, he has been missing for the past few years, and there is no way to find him. There must be no way to get intelligence, and he won't know the ways Zhuojing spread to seize the power of dimensional infection. The news of his fight with Zhuojing in the Earth Core Furnace Power Tower has spread. The Fifth Legion should pay special attention to that place, and many people will go there soon. I don't know what the situation will be like there. There's really no other way. Then let it be. Chen Ming hung up the phone in a hurry, stopped the work on the original body and the prosthesis, and put all his efforts into Whooping. Sure enough, no matter what the matter is, he still has to rely on himself in the end. As long as he kills the recipient, the Fifth Legion's idea of using the power of dimensional infection will naturally fall through. The threat from the Zhuojing psychic who has completely obtained the power of dimensional infection will no longer exist. Those who have not experienced dimensional infection personally are not worthy and cannot use this power well. And anyone who has experienced it, as long as they are not crazy or stupid, can see the horror of this power and will not try to get infected. So Chen Ming must completely eliminate this power here. Before the arrival of the psychics of the Fifth Legion, Chen Ming made up his mind. Continue to move underground. At this time, he gradually felt that the surrounding environment began to become hot, and the mental pressure on him became heavier. Finally, after breaking a layer of the underground isolation layer of the Earth Core Furnace Power Tower, a barrier made of flesh and blood appeared in front of Chen Ming. And after tearing this barrier apart, below it, there was a huge mountain of meat. He finally found his target. Chen Ming had some content in the research report on dimensional infection released by Zhuojing in his mind. When the dimensional infection occurred, Zhuojing immediately cut off the deformed tissue and transplanted it to a psychic who was undergoing the experiment. After triggering the power of the dimensional infection, he has become a huge meat mountain monster that now blocks the underground of the power supply tower. Just as Chen Ming discovered the meat mountain, a large amount of psychic fluctuations all rushed to Chen Ming. The psychic effect from the recipient was enough to affect Whooping in his current state. It caused Whooping's perception to have a significant deviation. Everything became distorted and frenzied under Whooping's perspective. The whole world was filled with disgusting flesh and blood. Only outside the power supply tower was a pure land and a way out. The recipient wanted to induce an whooping to leave here. Even Chen Ming himself was affected. Chen Ming's cognition was wrong. The meat mountain in front of him was no longer what it was before, but a mass of rotten flesh and blood that was about to decay. It only took a light blow to kill it. Even though he was staring at the huge meat mountain a second ago, he still didn't realize the difference. Of course, Chen Ming didn't fall for it. He found the problem within a few seconds after being affected. Because the Queen's consciousness and Chen Ming's consciousness had been carried together because of the condensation of spiritual energy. When Chen Ming's main consciousness was concentrated on Enwupiing, the Queen's consciousness naturally came here, and the Zerg hive consciousness headed by the Queen was of course attached to Enwupiing. Chen Ming didn't know how many bugs the Queen of Insects had now, but it was definitely more than the population of an ordinary colony planet. This amount of consciousness could not be brainwashed. The Queen of Insects just resisted the attack from the recipient. Since the Queen of Insects found the problem, it was equivalent to Chen Ming finding the problem. Chen Ming could fully observe the real situation in reality through the Queen of Insects' consciousness perspective and was not affected at all. Moreover, Chen Ming also discovered a special situation. This huge meat mountain can breathe. To be precise, it is not breathing, but it is doing a similar breathing action. Just when the meat mountain released psychic fluctuations to him, the meat mountain entered the exhalation state, and the overall psychic fluctuations would show a special and difficult-to-control feature. And at the moment when this wave of psychic fluctuations gradually dissipated, the meat mountain entered the inhalation state again, and the psychic fluctuations stabilized again. If you don't observe carefully, Chen Ming even really thought that this meat mountain was just a meat mountain without any psychic fluctuations. The state of this meat mountain constantly changes between the active state of exhalation and the gentle state of inhalation. Just like the psychic fluctuations of the recipient and the tropical climate, they have an unstable active period and a stable period. When the psychic fluctuations of the recipient are in the active period, not only will his psychic fluctuations become frantic, but it will also cause some sequelae that Chen Ming finds very familiar. Just now, the psychic fluctuations of the meat mountain surged out. Chen Ming noticed that several psychics outside the power tower who were fighting with other psychics, who must be psychics from Zhujiang, suddenly exploded. The explosion without any warning, they were all blown into a ball of blood mist, and all the psychics fighting outside, no matter which side they belonged to, were shocked. The death of these psychics can be said to be exactly the same as Lu Wei's death, and the death of these people, like Lu Wei's death, gave him the feeling of close contact with the dimensional infection. After combining this scene he saw with his own eyes and the problems he found from the meat mountain, Chen Ming also completely understood the real cause of Lu Wei's death. Obviously, the power of dimensional infection is not easy to control. It causes the recipient's psychic power to have intermittent problems and enter an active period. During the active period, whenever the recipient uses psychic power, a psychic wave with the breath of dimensional infection and not easily detected will go to where it should not go, that is, the outside world, to affect other people controlled by his psychic power, to kill them and explode them into blood mist. For Zhujiang, this sequelae is nothing at all, just a few people. With so many people under their control, this kind of thing is unlikely to happen to some important people by chance. Even if it is possible, they may have some other means to protect themselves. And those ordinary people don't need to care at all. Anyway, there will be no residual psychic fluctuations in such a release, and there is no way to suspect them, Zhujiang. At most, it will be regarded as a rare phenomenon or a special disease. Who would have thought that the victim of the recipient's use of psychic power during the active period would be Lu Wei in front of Chen Ming? And follow this logic. No wonder Chen Ming had no feeling at all when he saw the recipient last time. The recipient should have been in the stable period when they met last time, so Chen Ming failed to detect the problem, resulting in him letting the culprit run away even though he had contacted him. But this time, Chen Ming will not let the recipient run away again. At present, it seems that Zhujiang wants to delay time so that the recipient can adjust the stable period and active period. Let the stable period be longer than the active period. When the recipient is completely left with only the active period, everything will probably end. But since Chen Ming has come here, he obviously will not give the recipient a chance to continue to maintain the stable period. After resisting a round of mental attacks from the recipient, Chen Ming jumped down from the gap torn by the flesh and blood barrier. This time, Chen Ming did not condense plasma, but rushed into the meat mountain with his strong body. The wild force continued to smash the meat and penetrated deeper into it. The controlled energy tower had already displayed the specific size of the meat mountain in front of him. The meat mountain that he smashed with his punches also told him the strength of the meat mountain. As long as he could reach the core of the meat mountain, then all he had to do was calculate the appropriate amount of plasma. Since he already knew the formula and had the ability to calculate the formula, then the answer was obvious. Chao Fan had already completed the calculation and provided the data to Chen Ming. This time, the plasma equivalent that could be used deep underground was 3 times the amount of plasma that Chen Ming had originally intended to use to send away the Thousand Faces mind-running entity. The ball of light appeared in Chen Ming's palm again. The surrounding flesh mountains have begun to be annihilated by the aftermath of the plasma. This pure plasma aggregate, this dazzling annihilation light, will bring the recipient into his own grave. The threat of death is imminent. As a pure psychic, the recipient has no way to stop Chen Ming in terms of physical combat ability. There is only one thing he can do: release a huge amount of mental power and pull Chen Ming into the final battlefield for the battle between psychics at a face-to-face distance. Consciousness space. Chen Ming returned to his iron jungle on the island suspended in the universe. Compared to the last time he came in, the area of the island has almost doubled. In addition, the density and height of the iron trees on the island have increased significantly. The island in the consciousness space and the iron trees on the island represent Chen Ming's spiritual power strength. This means that he has made more progress since he came in last time. In the center of the island, the mountain built by the wreckage of the spacecraft is also much higher than before. Even at the foot of the mountain, in the previously empty area around, there are many buildings that are definitely man-made. If Chen Ming remembers correctly, these buildings are all buildings of the mechanical family. This should be the form of the cluster hive consciousness of the mechanical family with him as the core in his consciousness space. Chen Ming can also see the shadow of the ship's spirit passing through these buildings. After discovering that Chen Ming had entered the consciousness space station, it immediately flew to Chen Ming's side, circled around Chen Ming for a few times, and then returned to the buildings and continued to be busy. Now Chen Ming knew where the ship's spirit went when he was not on the ship, that is, he stayed in his consciousness space. It managed the mechanical buildings in the consciousness space. These mechanical buildings created some mechanicals and collected raw materials in the steel forest. The ship's spirit seemed to want to build something. Although Chen Ming didn't know what it was for, it would not harm him. After watching these changes on the isolated island, Chen Ming's eyes moved to the distance. At a distance from the isolated island, something was constantly approaching him. It was a biological spaceship belonging to the Zerg that was slightly smaller than the isolated island in the steel jungle. That biological spaceship was the external manifestation of the Queen of the Zerg in the consciousness space. When Chen Ming used the condensed spiritual energy source to connect the Queen of the Zerg with himself through consciousness, the Queen of the Zerg naturally appeared here. Chen Ming roughly estimated that the Queen's biological spaceship was about half the size of the island. The diameter of Chen Ming's island alone was at least 100 kilometers, and the height was about half the diameter. Such a biological warship that was half the size of his conical island was indeed a bit exaggerated. This giant Zerg biological warship was more terrifying than the main battleship. Of course, this biological warship only appeared in the consciousness space, not in reality. After Chen Ming confirmed that there were no other new changes in his consciousness space compared to the last time he came here, he looked at the reason why he came to this place and the recipient who also existed in this consciousness space. He was just opposite Chen Ming's island. However, the external manifestation of his consciousness space was not an island. It was a giant brain suspended in the universe, close at hand on the scale of the universe. Judging from the size alone, This brain was even larger than Chen Ming's island. Around the brain, there are several rings of flesh and blood covering the brain. If you look carefully, you can find that the flesh and blood tissues of these rings are almost all made of intestines. If Chen Ming guessed correctly, these intestines should be the source organs of the recipient's dimensional infection. This is the performance of the recipient in the consciousness space. Chen Ming can feel that the recipient is not only the part of the ability represented in the consciousness space that has become the brain. Moreover, the body in the consciousness space has lost its human form and has become a monster, merging with the huge brain. I saw that the brain that was slowly approaching Chen Ming's island had a crack near the top, and a huge bloodshot eye suddenly opened in the crack. Those flesh and blood rings were trembling excitedly, and the power of dimensional infection was also surging with the trembling of those intestines. It seemed to be leaking to the outside world through this consciousness space. This did not seem to be a good sign. Chen Ming had to hurry up, while Chen Ming was staring at the brain. The brain's eyes also saw Chen Ming's island and the steel jungle. Contempt appeared in his eyes. But soon, his eyes changed because he found something wrong. Before the recipient became a meat mountain, he had been paying attention to various intelligence. And in whooping, who had been trackings with Jing all the way, slaughterings with Jing all the way, being abducted by Chen Ming, and finally betraying, was naturally the one he paid the most attention to. The consciousness space of such a psychic with a physical mutation should not be this steel jungle. And when he saw the mountain made of spaceship wreckage in the center of the steel jungle, he completely confirmed this idea. Only a slow, doubtful, heavy, and tired voice came from the brain. "You are not," and whooping, "but the insect nest. No, not. You are a machine? Who are you?" At this time, Chen Ming, who was in the steel jungle, relied on his own control of the consciousness space and instantly came to the top of the wreckage mountain. He didn't say anything, just stood there. "Chen Ming, I should have thought of it earlier. Who would track us like a mad dog? You should die." After the brain finished speaking, it stopped talking and quickly approached the isolated island. Even because of the advantage in distance, the giant floating brain had arrived in front of the isolated island in a blink of an eye. In front of the brain, a gap full of sharp teeth like an abyss was cracked vertically again, as if it wanted to swallow the isolated island in one bite. At this time, Chen Ming could feel that his mental power was about to collide with the mental power of the recipient. After all, the isolated island and the brain are just the external manifestations of the mental power of the psychic in the consciousness space. All the means that seemed to be physical confrontations were all manifestations of mental power. What was really clashing was the most essential mental power of Chen Ming and the recipient. At this time, before the two sides fought completely, one of them still had the opportunity to give up a lot of mental power and get out. And when the existence of the two consciousness spaces came into contact, and the mental power of the two psychics was completely locked, only one person could get out alive. Chen Ming did not hesitate to highly condense his mental power. The steel jungle was like a living thing under his control. A large piece of steel thorns grew wildly at the position where the brain crack was about to bite. Who lives and who dies, there is only one answer for him. At the moment when the two behemoths collided, the brain bit down, and at the same time as the sharp whistling sound of the steel being torn and twisted sounded, the bloody mouth of the brain was also full of blood, and the large number of intestinal star rings surrounding the brain were also torn by these steel thorns, breaking and spraying blood. A missile took off, drew an arc in the air, and hit the brain accurately. This was not a missile in the true sense. It was an attack on the recipient at the mental level by the ship's spirit in the consciousness space, using its mental power combined with part of Chen Ming's mental power. It was just the external manifestation of the consciousness space, which transformed this attack into the most subjectively acceptable form for Chen Ming to see the effect. As the first missile took off, more and more missiles appeared in Chen Ming's consciousness space, whistling towards the brain. And the ship's spirit also began to manufacture more complex and diverse weapons and equipment, that is, using more complex and more efficient means of mental attack. The isolated island even became a firepower fortress under the transformation of the ship's spirit, fighting against the foreign abnormal creatures. Even though it was attacked by Chen Ming and the ship's spirit at the same time, the recipient still controlled the brain and tried to eat away at Chen Ming's isolated island. But he soon discovered that the damage he caused to the island by tearing off the steel every time was nothing compared to the damage the island caused him in return, even though his size indicated that his mental power was even greater than Chen Ming's. But the quality of Chen Ming's mental power was several times higher than his. Under such a mental power exchange ratio, if he continued like this, his ending would be no different from his ending outside. And, at this moment, the giant biological spaceship of the Queen of Insects finally arrived near Chen Ming's island. The mighty plasma acid cannons, countless biological missiles, biological fighters, and countless insect eggs were instantly sprayed by the Queen of Insects to the brain of the recipient. The power from the Queen of Insects bombarded the brain clinging to the edge of the island, shattering piece after piece of flesh and blood. There were also a large number of parasites that entered the brain through the cracks torn on the surface of the brain by the other flying insects, constantly destroying the structure of the brain. The parasites seemed to be parasitic, but in fact, the queen worm was piercing the spirit power into the receiver's spirit power, disrupting his control of spirit power. The receiver had been unable to gain an advantage over Chen Ming from the beginning. This was even more so after the queen worm joined the battlefield. The queen worm's arrival became the last straw that broke the camel's back. The receiver's brain had begun to decay. This meant that his spirit power had begun to dry up, and he was about to take a half step into death, just like him in reality. The madness that the single eye in the center of the receiver's brain could see became more and more serious. Even if he was going to die, he must not be the only one to die. The crazy and resentful eyes fell on Chen Ming, who was at the top of the mountain of spaceship wreckage. All the exposed flesh and blood tissues on the giant brain suddenly began to shrink, and all the intestinal star rings retracted into the brain. The receiver's mental power was fully turned to defense, but a force of dimensional infection that Chen Ming was very familiar with filled all parts of the brain. The receiver's mental power was still declining. But just before this mental power completely declined, a crack suddenly appeared in the center of the giant brain, running from head to tail. And behind the crack this time, there was no eyeball, no giant mouth, no flesh and blood. Instead, Chen Ming had seen a dark abyss with little scarlet starlight. That was another dimension. Chen Ming had no way to resist the power of the dimension, and the endless suction from the crack dragged his consciousness into the abyss. "Die with me." This was the last sentence Chen Ming heard before he was dragged into the abyss. His consciousness was torn and dragged crazily in the process of being dragged into the abyss. Horrible scars appeared on his consciousness. He struggled desperately, using his mental power as an anchor to continuously root in the way he was swallowed into the abyss. However, these anchors did not delay the attack. After suffering a severe blow, his consciousness was eventually dragged into the scarlet abyss and touched the red starlight. Half a second after Chen Ming's consciousness touched the unknown dimension, the recipient's mental power was completely exhausted, and the breath of death also emerged from his body. This was the price he paid for opening the abyss rift. At that time, the suction force on consciousness finally stopped. Chen Ming, who had just touched another dimension, immediately escaped from the abyss with the help of the anchor he had just set up. With the rescue of the ship's spirit, he returned to his isolated island. And it was in this short period of less than a second. All the steel forests on the entire isolated island in Chen Ming's consciousness space turned into scarlet rust. This is a sign of complete exhaustion of mental power. Chen Ming is now relying purely on willpower to persist. But willpower also has a limit. Chen Ming's mental power was so exhausted that his willpower could not hold on forever. He could not hold on any longer. Even if he destroyed the recipient on the spiritual level, he did not use up such a huge amount of mental power, but the half-second contact with the Scarlet Abyss almost killed him there. The ship's spirits eagerly surrounded Chen Ming's consciousness, and a gentle mental power continued to heal Chen Ming's mental damage. But Chen Ming finally couldn't resist, and his consciousness suddenly left the consciousness space. At the moment when he left the consciousness space, whether it was in Whooping, the prosthesis of the 14th Legion, or Chen Ming himself, they all collapsed to the ground at the same time, gasping for breath. Chen Ming's eyes trembled unconsciously, his hands trembled constantly, and he climbed up from the ground with great effort. The terminal that had just fallen to the ground beside him was making a sound of a call being dialed in. Chen Ming ignored it. He suddenly seemed to realize something. He no longer needed to rely on the starry sky cracks on the source of condensed spiritual energy that the ship's spirit had transformed. He could directly rely on his will to force his way back to the consciousness space. The ship's spirit was still healing the wounds on his consciousness body at this time. Chen Ming's consciousness body stood up. He looked at the position of the recipient just now. After the recipient died, the body of the giant brain had left the island, suspended in the universe, and was slowly decomposing the pure spiritual power. Everything looked good. A closed crack already existed in his consciousness space. During the decomposition of the brain's body, the crack did not disappear, but was closed and continued to float there. From that crack, there was a slight leakage of the power belonging to that dimension that his consciousness space could withstand and absorb. He seemed to become the successor of the dimensional infection power. But it seems inappropriate to say that it was an inheritance, because the recipient did not transfer the power to him, but the recipient used his own power belonging to the dimensional infection to open a crack leading to another dimension. Chen Ming's consciousness was dragged into another dimension, another crazy and chaotic dimension. The madness of this dimension is not pure madness, but a kind of madness of having everything. It's like a library full of books. Ordinary libraries allow people to go in and search and read at will. But at the moment of entering this library, all the knowledge will flow into the brain of the entrant for no reason. This is madness. Of course, it is not appropriate to say that it is knowledge, because these things are not organized knowledge in Chen Ming's personal experience. Instead, it is closer to making people experience an extra feeling and experience the existence of psychic effects and psychic knowledge from the feeling. It is precisely because some people cannot bear this feeling. As a result, all the cells of that person, which contain everything in the human body, were completely filled up under the effect of this knowledge and lost their original functions. They became flesh and blood that could not be completely fixed. This is why Chen Ming has never understood why all kinds of flesh and blood tissues will appear once something related to psychic energy goes wrong. These flesh and blood filled with knowledge cannot be understood by ordinary people. But this is the truth. Chen Ming really felt this time. And in that terrifying world, he obtained the knowledge of the upper limit that he could bear. It was this knowledge that brought him the power from the dimensional infection. This power was obtained by himself, and the recipient only gave him the key to open the door of the library. The power of the dimensional infection that truly belonged to the recipient has completely dissipated. No, it was dissipated to the outside world. Although Chen Ming's mental power is still in a state of exhaustion, after he has passed the limit and the spiritual power of the recipient after his death, his consciousness is extremely active at this time. He is constantly thinking about the less than a second he entered that dimension. In that less than a second, Chen Ming saw a lot of unknown things, which blocked his brain and made his brain think. Only thinking can make his brain active and relieve the pain of his brain being filled. In his opinion, the power of dimension infection is wrong after mastering new knowledge. This power actually comes from the power of that dimension, that is, the power of dimension. Chen Ming's mental power suddenly weakened again. But as his mental power weakened, the effect of his psychic power was significantly enhanced. Relying on the power of the dimension, Chen Ming has a deeper understanding of his own psychic power. He finally understood why the Afterglow core controlled by him could not use psychic power transmission. The reason is also very simple, that is, his psychic power has been linked to this dimension that gave him new power since the moment he first awakened. He used this dimension to transport materials thousands of light years apart in the normal universe. Although the knowledge Chen Ming has learned so far cannot explain why his psychic power is involved in this dimension. but he can be sure that this is the case in real time. And in such a dimension full of crazy knowledge, if an individual with independent consciousness enters and is dragged into the abyss, death will only be his final destination. Individuals with hive consciousness, such as the Zerg, also preserve the consciousness of the sub-individuals through the hive thinking network built with Chen Ming as the core, and transport the body without consciousness and stuff the consciousness back to ensure safety. Then things are actually simple. Chen Ming patted the ship's spirit that had been helping him recover, and his consciousness returned to reality. His psychic energy fluctuations mobilized the power of part of the dimension he now controlled, protecting a gamma-level individual far away in the glory of the sky, and protecting the consciousness in the afterglow core. The next moment, a gamma-level afterglow core appeared in Chen Ming's palm. The individual consciousness inside is still alive. This is what Chen Ming learned from the dimensional infection. And more than that, Chen Ming put away the core of the afterglow and gathered the power of the dimension in his palm. He waved his arm in front of him, and a deep abyss appeared in front of him. His psychic power was no longer limited to the ability to transform materials, but could use the power of the dimension to directly transmit. Chen Ming was about to step in, but before he stepped in, he stopped. Not enough. His ability was not enough to protect him in that dimension, and the sense of danger was stimulating his brain. It was not that Chen Ming's mental power was not enough to transmit. But something would come to trouble him. Those who really created the dimensional infection might be the existence of the native creatures of this dimension. With Chen Ming's current ability, it was not enough to get out of their hands. It still could not directly use psychic power to transmit itself. Although the mark of the dimensional infection coordinates was Chen Ming's own body, but the mark of this dimension on him was his consciousness. As long as his consciousness went in, something would definitely happen. I don't know what those who can survive in this dimension are. I can only say, after coming into contact with the power of the dimension, Chen Ming's own power has begun to change in a more outrageous direction. The changes in the previous repair psychic power can actually show clues. How can the repair psychic power directly repair the essence of an object? So the modification ability has become an existence close to the space ability, and Chen Ming immediately accepted it. It will probably not be long before Chen Ming's other spiritual powers will also undergo new changes under the blessing of the dimension power. It just takes time for him to get familiar with it, that's all. However, Chen Ming suddenly found that he seemed to have some content that he didn't need to be familiar with spiritual power, and could be explained directly through the knowledge he obtained in that dimension. For example, when Chimian copied Enwupiang's spiritual power, it was not the spiritual power of the Queen of Insects that was copied, but a spiritual power that integrated all of Enwupiang's abilities. This special situation seems to be related to Chen Ming himself. Chen Ming has always felt very strange. He designed the whole process of making Enwupiang himself, and he personally experienced every step, and worked it out step by step with the Queen of Insects. Why did his psychic power combined with the Queen of Insects' psychic power produce such an effect in the end? Why did it become like this? Why did the psychic power effect extracted by Chenmian have some things that did not exist in the design at all? Why didn't he feel anything strange when he was controlling the prosthesis of Enwupiang? Even now? The answers to these questions have always been there. It's just that Chen Ming didn't understand it before. Now that he can connect these clues through the knowledge in his mind, the answer is about to come out. Enwupiang's psychic power that can be reproduced by Chenmian is a new psychic power born after Chen Ming's psychic power merged with the psychic power of the Queen of Insects. Psychic power does not appear for no reason. Only creatures that grow naturally can awaken psychic power. As a manually created thing, Enwupiang only has the psychic powers of the Queen Worm and Chen Ming attached to him. Only the fusion of these two psychics is the source of Enwupiang's psychic power. Chen Ming focused his attention on Enwupiang. He gathered the psychic power fluctuations that he usually used to control Enwupiang. Although it is invisible to the naked eye, in his perception, Enwupiang's psychic power fluctuations are entangled in his hands. It is mainly based on the psychic power of the Queen Worm, and his own psychic power is supplemented, intertwined. Before, when he didn't know much about psychic power, Unwhooping psychic power fluctuations seemed to Chen Ming to be two psychic powers of the queen worm and his own, which were clearly separated and performed their own functions. But after knowing enough, Chen Ming was able to change his previous thoughts and see that the psychic effects of these two on Unwhooping have been completely integrated and cannot be separated. Even if Chen Ming's subjective consciousness only wants to call on the psychic power of the queen worm when controlling Unwhooping, his own part of the psychic power will spontaneously follow up due to the nature of the psychic power and play the complete effect of Unwhooping's psychic power. This situation looks familiar. Higu from the Psychic Research Institute of the 14th Corps just gave Chen Ming an example not long ago. It is an example of a mind-running entity entering the middle and late stages. Higu said before that a mind-running entity will be divided into several stages after it appears. At the beginning, it is the early stage of the mind-running entity. The various psychic properties and psychic fluctuations that constitute it are independent and clear from each other. It can correspond to the stage when Chen Ming's psychic power and the Queen's psychic power are clearly separated after Unwhooping was created, and after the mind-running entity enters the middle stage. The different psychic properties of the mind-running entity will have a preliminary fusion, and one psychic fluctuation can mobilize all the psychic fluctuations of the entity. It also corresponds to the stage when Chen Ming can mobilize the psychic fluctuations of Unwhooping's body with the Queen's psychic fluctuations after he skillfully controls Unwhooping. Chen Ming did not notice this at the time. The main reason is that when he was controlling Unwhooping, his consciousness was directly acting on the entire body, and everything in Unwhooping's entire prosthesis was under his control. Chen Ming's subconscious and instinctive reactions could control the body, so that he could not realize that when he was using one psychic wave, another psychic wave was actually mobilized spontaneously, rather than subconsciously dispatching it to cooperate with the use of psychic energy. Chen Ming had already adapted to this psychic energy without knowing it. Even now, looking back, when he first faced the psychic runaway entity and released the light of annihilation, the way he released plasma was actually not through the organs on his body that came from the Aurora Wind Spirit, but directly dispatched through psychic energy, mainly because of habit. Once you get used to it, you will naturally ignore it. But anyway, the situation at this stage is exactly the same as what Higu said. And after the psychic runaway entity enters the late stage, multiple psychic waves will be completely integrated, no longer expressing the original psychic effect, but will generate some psychic waves with unique effects. Of course, Higu had said before that most of the special psychic fluctuations that came out like this were concepts that humans could not understand. But it was obvious that Unwhooping's was a form of expression that humans could understand, and it just happened to match the expression of Unwhooping's own combat ability. Although Chen Ming himself felt that it was a bit far-fetched, after all, there were too many coincidences. But after Chen Ming thought about it, he still thought that the answer was this. Psychics are people who influence reality with their will. This was a sentence that the boss had said to him at the beginning. He also agreed with it very much. Chen was able to retain his consciousness after becoming a psychotic entity, which put into the ground what Higu said that the consciousness of a psychic was dead after becoming a psychotic entity. Then why couldn't he transform the psychic energy in Unwhooping, the psychotic entity, into what he wanted to see? Unwhooping's psychic energy is the psychic energy of the psychotic entity, which just happened to explain Chen situation. That's why Chen can copy Unwhooping's psychic energy in normal state. But in the psychotic state, he died directly after absorbing Unwhooping's psychic energy. The reason is very simple, because in normal state, Chen's use of psychic energy is simply copying a new psychic energy fluctuation, but this psychic energy fluctuation comes from a psychotic entity. After entering the psychotic state, Chen's psychic energy effect becomes extremely complicated. But there are still several main psychic energies that stabilize his consciousness and stabilize his psychotic entity. In this case, replicating Unwhooping's psychic energy, which is also the product of the mind runaway, into the mind runaway entity is equivalent to forcibly inserting another foundation into the pit of the foundation. That is why the body of the thousand-faced mind runaway entity collapsed, and he felt something was wrong at that time. That is why he said that Chen Ming was a monster. All these can be matched. The only thing that does not match is that Unwhooping's appearance has not changed. There is no drastic change in appearance like other mind runaway entities that Chen Ming has seen. But this can also be explained. You only need to trace the roots back for a while, to about 2 years ago. The moment Chen Ming just woke up from the abandoned mining space station, the moment he just came to this world. Chen Ming is not a pure time traveler, nor a pure native. It is an existence formed by combining the similar memories and life experiences of the two. The two different minds have long been completely integrated together. This statement seems no different from the mind runaway entity. They are all psychic-related entities of different natures fused together. Thinking about it this way, Chen Ming is, in a sense, a psychotic entity. This is not a feeling Chen Ming has just now. He had a similar idea before. When he first encountered a psychotic entity some time ago, Chen Ming asked Higu about the specific triggering conditions of the psychotic entity. Higu said that if a psychic has a variety of psychic-related things of different natures, including the psychic's own spiritual nerves, it is possible for the psychic to go psychotic. Before, Chen Ming had 4 spiritual stones on him: whisper, fear, infatuation, and words of madness. A neutral revolver, and a bone sword that Chen Ming had seized from the Black Mist psychic, but had never found a suitable place to use. If you count more strictly, the psychic fluctuations of the Queen of Insects can be counted. The boat spirit and the small stone are not counted. After all, the boat spirit and Chen Ming's psychic energy are of the same origin. And Xiaoshi's psychic power was not completely controlled by Chen Ming like the psychic power of the Queen Worm. Chen Ming didn't even know what psychic power Xiaoshi had. But even if Xiaoshi and the boat spirit were not counted, Chen Ming had already possessed countless psychic materials of different natures. At that time, he felt that something was wrong. He should have gone on a mental rampage, but in fact, he didn't. Does this mean that his situation is special? Chen Ming's previous idea was finally confirmed today. He is a special person. Otherwise, with so many different kinds of psychic-related things on his body, he would have become a mental rampage entity. No, he has become a mental rampage entity, so he can continue to remain the same in so many kinds of psychic-related things. Everything makes sense. Since Chen Ming is a mental rampage entity, it seems that there is no problem for the psychic power of the mental rampage entity to merge with a new psychic power belonging to the Queen Worm. There is also no problem if the performance of the new psychic power can be understood by people. Although Chen Ming seemed to have expelled himself from the human race, other people didn't know this, so it was not unacceptable to him. After all, if we trace back to the source, isn't his crossing similar to dimensional infection? They are all one dimension invading another dimension. But the dimensional infection from the Scarlet Dimension is more brutal. And Chen Ming's dimension only sent him here. Of course, Chen Ming couldn't be completely sure about the places related to these dimensions, and could only guess. After all, he didn't know enough about dimensions. He just had a certain understanding of psychic power after briefly entering the Scarlet Dimension. However, since the crack leading to the Scarlet Dimension has been left in his consciousness space, and he has mastered a certain amount of dimensional power, even the crack in his consciousness space station has no psychic fluctuations infected by the dimension leaking out, and all the dimensional power has been completely absorbed by the consciousness space, and will not affect the outside world at all. Then as long as he can continue to exercise this power, he will be able to figure out things related to the dimension sooner or later. After Chen Ming made a thorough summary of his abilities, 1 body and 2 prostheses returned to their posts. The body continued to coordinate the development process. The prosthesis of the 14th Legion picked up the terminal that he accidentally dropped on the ground when his mental power was exhausted. Chen Ming remembered that the terminal had rang just when he was lying on the ground. He glanced at the person who had just called and immediately called back. "Sorry, President, I was busy and missed the call. What's up?" The president's tone was much more relaxed than before, and he said, "There are 2 pieces of news, good and bad." Before the president asked which piece of news Chen Ming wanted to hear, Chen Ming answered first, Okay. Just now, the psychic fluctuations of the psychic with brainwashing hypnosis ability called the receiver in Zhuajing disappeared. After being uncontrolled, almost all of those who were originally controlled by his psychic power chose to surrender. You should have seen it, right? After hearing this, Chen Ming immediately called up the video recordings of the Yuhui fleet he deployed at the edge of various galaxies. Just now, when he controlled an whooping to arrive at the face of the meat mountain that the receiver had turned into. The receiver chose to let the fleet of the Lucy galaxy with Prometheus as the flagship take the initiative to attack the outside world, and all the people controlled by him launched a desperate charge like crazy. After Chen Ming, in the consciousness space, fought a life-and-death battle with the recipient's psychic power failed, and the people in the fighting fleets naturally woke up. Most of the rational people chose to cease fire and retreat, unload their weapons, and surrender. The irrational people, of course, became a bunch of fireworks. I understand. After confirming the good news that the Lucy galaxy had been completely under the control of the Fifth Legion and Order had regained the upper hand, Chen Ming asked, "What about the bad?" The president said, "Before the recipient's psychic fluctuations disappeared, a large number of dimensional infected psychic fluctuations appeared deep underground in the power tower, and these psychic fluctuations were completely leaked out. The entire planet has been completely infected, and it is estimated that the number of people who may survive is no more than 0.01%. Chen Ming was silent. He actually knew this news. When he was fighting with the recipient, before entering the consciousness space, the dimensional infection had already begun to leak. At that time, he had no choice but to speed up as much as possible. However, even if he speeded up, the winner was decided in just 5 minutes after he met the recipient. But this speed was still a step too slow. The president was unlikely to hear too much from Chen Ming's silence. He continued, "The Fifth Legion speculated that in whooping killed Wu Jing's psychic, and during the battle, the recipient leaked the dimensional infection, which led to the fall of the entire planet from the industrial zone. Not many people will survive, it's a pity. But we don't have to worry about Wu Jing continuing to use the dimensional infection to make trouble, and we don't have to worry about the Fifth Legion creating some new troubles for the power of dimensional infection. But the Fifth Legion seems to be very angry. I wonder if there will be some small moves in other aspects." The goodwill that Chen Ming had accumulated from cooperating with the Fifth Legion some time ago had already completely disappeared because of their behavior. "I don't think we need to care about the attitude of the Fifth Legion. They are just a legion. The key is the attitude of the Empire." The president is obviously also at the level of the Empire. The person who has contact with him said, "The Empire doesn't care. It's best to get that power. If they can't get it, it doesn't matter as long as there are no subsequent troubles. Otherwise, the top psychics with the Empire background would have gone to grab this power long ago." Chen Ming suddenly had a question. Speaking of this, why didn't the Empire send top psychics to grab this power? The combat power of those psychics in Wu Jing should not be top-notch, right? It seems that they can't face the boss. Why doesn't the Empire directly send psychics of sufficient level? The president explained, "It's a very simple truth. Using a top psychic to exchange for a power with uncertain specific negative effects, or negative effects related to dimensional infection, do you think this business is profitable? It's indeed not profitable. So there's nothing wrong with handing this kind of thing over to your subordinates, right? Indeed. Seizing power is not destroying it. Seizing power requires getting close to it in person. It is not that you can just kill the left-handed psychic with psychic effects from a distance. If there was a psychic of the same level as the boss who participated in this matter and arrived under the power supply tower, then Chen Ming really couldn't say whether the rift leading to the scarlet dimension created by the recipient before his death would kill the psychic. After all, Chen Ming knew that he was a special person. His psychic power was related to his scarlet dimension from the beginning, so he was able to come back alive after his consciousness entered the scarlet dimension for nearly a second. But it's really hard to say for others. The backup left by Wu Jing will really pose a great threat to other psychics. That's why the Empire has such an attitude." Since the matter was over, Chen Ming did not say much about it, but just asked another question. "How top-notch are the top psychics? Are there specific levels of psychics?" The president asked back, "Why do you ask this suddenly? I heard from others that I am a level 5 psychic. I am curious and asked." "Oh, it's not that I can't tell you. Let me briefly talk about it from the lowest to the highest. Level 1 psychics are psychics who have just awakened. They only know the effects of their own psychic powers and perform some basic psychic effects. Level 2, distance. It has been a while since the psychic awakening, and you can skillfully use the basic psychic effects and start further psychic development. Level 3, usually the psychic has entered the final stage of development, and you can start horizontal development and expand the application direction of psychic. Level 4, single-person city destruction. Ah! Chen Ming was stunned for a moment and made a puzzled sound. Isn't this a bit too jumpy? The president said affirmatively, no problem, that's how it is divided. The first 3 levels are all in the development stage. The psychic of level 4 is secretly whether he can destroy the city alone. Only in this way can psychics with the ability to destroy planets have further value. Take you as an example. When you control your first cruiser, you can be considered a level 4 psychic. A cruiser can destroy a city on the surface. When the number of fleets you control exceeds the defense force of a normal planet, you can be considered the next level, which is level 5. Level 5, psychics with the initial ability to destroy planets by themselves can be included here. This is your current level, and there is also the level of ManhwaRecap, who I mentioned to you several times recently. The next level is level 6, which is galaxy level. A single person's psychic power can affect the entire galaxy and can be classified as a single person destroying a galaxy. I, Wuan, and Hui can all be counted in this category, and Yin Xiong, who was killed by you not long ago, is also in this category. You killed a level 6 psychic with the strength of a level 4 psychic close to a level 5 psychic. At that time, it caused quite a stir, and many people started to pay attention to you from that time. But Wuan helped you to block all kinds of troubles, so you may not feel anything. Chen Ming actually knew what the president was talking about. After all, at that time, he was carrying the 3 titles of Yu Hui's natural enemy, the best symbol of opposing Zhu Jing, and level 6 psychic was killed by a level 4 psychic, as he knows now. Even though the boss had prevented his information from being leaked in various ways to prevent him from standing out in the forest, there were still a lot of news flying around. He knew this very well, so he always respected the boss Chen Ming. Of course, this is Chen Ming's own business. He still wants to say, I understand the reason, but is Yin Xiong really level 6? The president said, reaching the edge of level 6 is also level 6. Staying at level 6 for 10 years is also level 6. Yin Xiong has indeed reached the edge of the galaxy level. Since the president said so, Chen Ming did not continue to refute. Then what about above? No, there are no higher level psychics yet, but there is a grading in the setting, which is the star zone level. You can just treat the level of our psychics as the scale of the government level of our empire and use it directly. Chen Ming asked, that is to say, the ability of a level 7 psychic can cover a star region, the ability of a level 8 psychic can cover a star region? Something like that, but there is no specific classification, don't talk about it in a formal occasion. I won't say this in a formal occasion, right? The president smiled and said, don't underestimate yourself. You have the potential. By the way, you have to remember that although the classifications I told you are recognized, they are only a judgment level for the scope and general effect of psychic power, for reference only. The actual combat ability does not depend on this. The fight between you and Yin Xiong is the best example. Well, that's it. That's all I have to say. Once this planet is cleaned up and the dimensional infection is confirmed to have been completely eradicated, our mission will be over. Wait a minute. Chen Ming suddenly interrupted. I remember that ManhwaRecap experienced a dimensional infection, right? Does that mean? Yes, but we can't stop it. The president's tone was also full of helplessness. The authority of this matter is basically in the hands of the 5th Legion later. They said they would stop ManhwaRecap, but they let ManhwaRecap go, and even let him run to the Lucy Galaxy easily. I even heard that ManhwaRecap ran to the Lucy Galaxy in front of the fleet that the 5th Legion came to intercept. We can only hope that 2-dimensional infections on the same person will not lead to more serious consequences. In fact, ManhwaRecap's body has actually been replaced by Chen Ming, and the overall state is still in a state of having experienced a dimensional infection. But other people don't know, so Chen Ming has to find a way to confirm the mouth to avoid problems. What should we do with ManhwaRecap? I don't know. My suggestion is to recruit him. But as far as I know, the parties involved in the Lucy Galaxy have not yet discussed a suitable result. The president failed to give a clear attitude towards Whooping. Chen Ming did not bother the president anymore, hung up the phone, and returned to the underground of the Earth core furnace energy tower. There was only a mess here now, although Chen Ming's main goal along the way was the recipient. However, the tracking process and the aftermath of the battle with Chimian and Zhan still caused considerable damage to the energy tower. There was nothing left to save the energy tower, so just leave. But before leaving, a large number of tentacles controlled by the queen worm grew on Chen Ming's left arm and extended to the surroundings. These tentacles invaded the body of the recipient, which had turned into a meat mountain, and devoured him. Chen Ming's plan was obvious. Let the queen worm eat the recipient to see if he could get some of his memories from the body of the recipient, and by the way, see if he could get more information about Zhuajing. Anyway, the recipient is dead, and Zhuajing has lost the core figure with brainwashing ability. The Empire's suppression of Zhuajing will definitely be more effective in the future. It is definitely not a bad thing to get more intelligence to target Zhuajing. At the same time that Chen Ming asked the Queen of Insects to do so, his remaining little mental power was also protected by the Queen of Insects' mental power. Once there is a problem, he will immediately help the Queen of Insects to cut off this part of consciousness to prevent worse consequences. After all, this is the body of the recipient. After his death, there may be some means left. It is always right to be just in case. The tentacles proliferated inside the meat mountain, growing and eating continuously. When the Queen of Insects' tentacles ate half of the meat mountain and ate near the center of the meat mountain, the Queen of Insects' tentacles suddenly stopped. A tentacle twitched a few times in the center of the meat mountain, twisted back, and spit out a round thing in front of Chen Ming. It was the head of a person with a certain chaotic flesh and blood on the edge. The head dug out from the meat mountain should be the recipient's head. Chen Ming didn't react to what happened to the head for a while. After all, the Queen of Insects reads memories mainly by devouring the brain, so it's quite strange to spit out a complete head. But the next moment, Chen Ming's expression became serious. Because the face on this head is different from the face of the brainwashed psychic that Chen Ming saw through Qinmian's last remaining consciousness. This is not the face of the brainwashed psychic. Chen Ming immediately picked up the head, and his other hand turned into a tentacle and wrapped around the head to check the condition of the head. He felt extremely strong psychic fluctuations belonging to the recipient from this head, and also found a dead spiritual nerve with the breath of the recipient inside the head. But he didn't find any signs of plastic surgery on the head, nor did he find any evidence that this head didn't belong to the meat mountain or the recipient. This is the original face of the recipient. Judging from his age, he is probably in his 40s, about the same age as Qinmian. And the brainwashed psychic in Qinmian's memory is also in his 40s in Qinmian's memory. But Qinmian should have been less than 20 years old when he became a psychic and joined Zhuajing. The brainwashed psychic at that time looked 40 years old, so he should be at least 60 years old now. This age is wrong. The situation of the recipient does not match the brainwashed psychic of Zhuajing in Qinmian's memory. They are not the same person. Chen Ming suddenly remembered something and quickly took out the resentment spirit stone that appeared after Qinmian's death. This resentment spirit stone did not resonate after Chen Ming killed the recipient, and still caused hallucinations in front of Chen Ming when he held it. And through the hallucination brought by the spirit stone, she also confirmed the appearance of the brainwashed psychic again. That brainwashed psychic is really not the recipient. Wait, that's not right. Chen Ming suddenly thought of another possibility. A possibility that is very similar to what he has been doing. Chen Ming recorded all the data of the recipient's head in his hand, threw the head back to the Queen of Insects, and let the Queen of Insects eat it. Soon, the memories of the recipient were transmitted back by the Queen of Insects. From birth to adulthood to joining Zhuajing. From becoming the new generation of Zhuajing's leader to the final death in a fight with Chen Ming on Yunluoxing. The recipient's memory is very clear, so clear that almost all details can be found. Of course, there are also memories of the first meeting with the young Qinmian. The actual time of these memories is more than 60 years, not 40 years. There is an obvious gap with the recipient's physical age. The recipient's memory is obviously problematic. Such a memory that does not match the age and can be thoroughly remembered in all details can only be one situation. That is, this memory is false, implanted by someone, or forcibly changed. Chen Ming suddenly punched the power tower, shattering a large part of the wall. The real brainwashing psychic is someone else and is hidden in a more secret place. What he did was just to solve the trouble on the surface. Chen Ming originally thought that the recipient was the source of the continuous spread of the cult of Zhuojing. After all, a brainwashing psychic is in line with the underlying logic of the cult. However, the real brainwashing psychic is someone else. Although the recipient can also be regarded as a brainwashing psychic, he is incomplete, or in other words, he is a part of the real brainwashing psychic. In short, it is Zhuojing's real brainwashing psychic who uses his psychic power to brainwash another psychic. And this psychic was really transformed into a brainwashing psychic after his own memory was erased, and he had most of the memory of the brainwashing psychic. At least in his cognition, he is Zhuojing's brainwashed psychic. It's enough to just have the memory of the brainwashed psychic. The key is that this psychic, that is, the recipient, actually became a new brainwashed psychic after possessing the memory of the brainwashed psychic and possessed the psychic effect of brainwashing. This is the most exaggerated part. The recipient is actually no different from an Wupeing in essence. Both are psychics using their own psychic effects to achieve long-distance control of a certain individual. It's just that Chen Ming relies on the biological technology level of the queen of insects, and the psychic control of an Wupeing is absolutely stable. The brainwashed psychic directly uses the bodies of other psychics to carry out a thorough brainwashing. Use brainwashing to transform the consciousness of the psychic into the same consciousness as oneself and control it in disguise. Chen Ming doesn't even know if this situation is likely to happen again. It shouldn't be the case. After all, if brainwashed psychics can be mass-produced, the empire should have been completely controlled by mass-produced brainwashed psychics. The situation of the recipient is probably only a small probability event. It is even possible that the recipient's own psychic effect tends to affect others from the mind, so he is transformed into a brainwashed psychic. The real brainwashed psychic should only control the high-level Zhuojing forces such as the recipient, Jinmian, and Zhun. But he does have the possibility of controlling this real power that belongs to Zhuojing hidden deeper. The threat of Zhuojing has not been completely eliminated. Who is supporting Zhuojing? Chen Ming originally felt happy about solving the core figure of Zhuojing, the recipient. As a result, it has not been long since then, and new troubles have already shrouded his heart. It is still the kind of trouble that cannot be investigated or solved in a short time. This is really... Chen Ming sighed. After repeatedly confirming through the queen worm that there was no real clue of the brainwashing psychic left in the recipient's memory, he could only clean up. Following the passage of the power supply tower, he returned to the surface. Before reaching the surface and stepping out of the half-collapsed power supply tower, Chen Ming suddenly half-knelt on the ground again and coughed violently. He felt a sharp pain in his brain, not in Wupeing's brain, but Chen Ming's own brain. After protecting the queen worm from devouring the recipient and controlling an Wupeing to come out from deep underground, his mental power was once again close to exhaustion. Even while his brain was in pain, Chen Ming could feel that in Wupeing's abdomen also felt a pressure from the inside out. Obviously, this was when he was fighting with the recipient just now. The psychic fluctuations of the dimension infection released by the recipient had already spread to the surface and formed a climate on the surface. When he came up, these psychic fluctuations naturally found him. Fortunately, Chen Ming had nothing but a very fast recovery speed of mental power. He was able to resist the influence of the dimensional infection and walked out of the power supply tower. Just when he saw the moment he walked out of the power supply tower, a scene like hell entered his eyes. Countless wriggling flesh and blood stuck industrial buildings to each other, and countless flesh and blood monsters wandered between the buildings. When Chen Ming just arrived, many industrial buildings in the industrial zone were temporarily suspended, but at least Chen Ming could still feel that the entire industrial zone had a kind of vitality. And now, this vitality still exists, but this vitality is active to the extent of being pathological. If Chen Ming had come out a while earlier, he might have heard the screams of these monsters who walked by dragging their intestines all over the ground. But now, the only thing left in the entire industrial zone is the sticky movement of the flesh and blood monsters wandering around. Not only the industrial area, but also the residential area for employees outside the industrial area is in the same miserable state. Even some places in the wilderness have begun to appear in large areas covered with blood and flesh. The entire planet has fallen, and all places with living creatures will look like this. This apocalyptic scene deeply stimulated Chen Ming, causing him to feel a suppressed pain in his temple. This is the first time he has seen the final fate of the leaked area after the large-scale leakage of the dimension infection in reality. It is more shocking than any photo or any record. The president said that when a planet is infected by the dimension, the number of people who can actually survive may be 0.01%. But after experiencing it personally, Chen Ming found that the president actually concealed some information from him. Even Whooping's body was torn by the power of the dimension infection. How can ordinary people resist this power? A colony in a prosperous star field has a population of at least 1 billion even in this era. Can there really be 100,000 people who can survive? Can there really be 1,000 people? Even if we count the psychics who arrived on the planet and then retreated safely, can there really be so many people? It seems that no one cares about this. Chen Ming looked up at the sky and could vaguely see the traces of the 5th Legion fleet outside the atmosphere. They did not make any rescue operations, nor did they try to eliminate the dimensional infection. They just arranged the fleet and watched there. Death, it seems, is really just a number. Chen Ming remembered that when the president took the initiative to tell him about this matter just now, the president's attitude was the same. Obviously, the president is usually willing to protect civilians, but when he said the estimated number of deaths, Chen Ming did not hear any waves from his tone. Even Chen Ming has always respected civilians. When he concluded from the information about the surrounding environment that the entire planet had fallen and the number of survivors might be only 1 in a million, he had no feeling at all. After all, it's just a string of numbers. How can there be any feeling? But as long as you specifically learn about the actual situation on the planet, knowing that countless living lives and countless harmonious and happy families on the entire planet have disappeared, you will naturally feel heavy in your heart. For example, the middle-aged woman that Chen Ming met before entering the Earth Core Furnace Power Tower. The bag in her hand may be the relief supplies she received from the material warehouse near the Yunluo star after the industrial zone stopped working. She will go back to make a dinner for her husband and children. But now, there is only nothingness left. Chen Ming sighed and shook his head. Prepare to find an opportunity to leave the planet to avoid being attacked by those flesh and blood monsters. His mental state is not good, and the best way to evacuate the planet now is to steal a spaceship directly. Although Chen Ming can see through the atmosphere that the fleet of the 5th Legion has blocked the planet, it is obvious that the psychics who leave the planet in the last bit of time will be checked. However, as long as he reaches space, he has various ways to get out. And there should be people who will not watch him fall into the hands of the 5th Legion. Just as Chen Ming was scanning the surroundings, trying to find a suitable spaceship, he suddenly heard a strange sound. Chen Ming turned his head immediately. His eyes widened instantly, but his pupils shrank subconsciously. Because he saw the bag. The bag taken away by the middle-aged woman was now hanging on the flesh and blood monster that had just made the noise. This monster was the person he had just seen. She was dead, and became such a monster after death. Chen Ming lowered his head with a gloomy face. He really couldn't bear to see these. Quality inspection. A small ball of plasma suddenly flew out from Chen Ming's fingertips, completely annihilating the flesh and blood monster. At least in this way, her body would not continue to suffer in this world. But when the plasma dissipated, the bag hanging on the extended flesh and blood tentacles was not annihilated together, but fell to the ground. The food inside was scattered all over the floor. Among the raw meat that had grown some flesh tentacles, Chen Ming saw a small gift box. A piece of paper attached to the gift box was blown by foam and fell in front of Chen Ming. There was a line of words written on the paper. A 12-year-old gift from my mother, definitely better than my father's. Chen Ming's movements froze. He took a deep breath, took 2 steps, and picked up the gift box. After opening it, a delicate and small spaceship model was lying quietly in the gift box. This was a model of a Storm-class spaceship. It was obvious that this was not a relief item. Instead, it was something that the family had prepared long ago. On the birthday of the child at home, the family wrapped up the gift under the pretext of going out to collect relief supplies and prepare to take it home. The mother could no longer bring the gift home to the child, and the child could no longer wait for the mother who had not returned yet. Chen Ming stared at the model of the spaceship in his hand for a long time with an expressionless face, put it back into the gift box, and put the gift box into the backpack he carried with him. He closed his eyes. A few minutes later, a ring of plasma swept out from his body, turning everything left in the entire industrial zone into dust. Let these people be buried here. Chen Ming opened his eyes again and looked into the distance. There are more places on this planet where people live. There are more places, and more similar things are happening. Chen Ming saw with his own eyes the world eroded by dimensional infection and the consequences of dimensional infection. This is the horror of dimensional infection. Chen Ming sank slightly into the consciousness space. The breath of the scarlet dimension was still giving him the power from the dimension. This power was really heavy. A few minutes passed again. Chen Ming calmed down, controlled and whooping to enter the insect state, and flew a distance away from the industrial zone. The spaceships near the industrial zone were basically wiped out. The flesh monsters had already destroyed the spaceships. Otherwise, he would not have ignored the spaceships and directly washed the ground with plasma. So next, he had to go to the nearest aerospace airport, where there should be spaceships left. But before Chen Ming found the right direction, a shuttle suddenly came to Chen Ming's vicinity at high speed. The hatch opened, and a man in military uniform shouted to Chen Ming, "Hey!" and whooping, "Are you interested in joining our Fifth Corps? Your mental power seems to be almost exhausted. Join us, and we will take you away. Hurry up and give us a reply. We don't have time to wait for you, unless you want to be buried with the monsters below." The man who spoke was a psychic, full of arrogance. Chen Ming took a special look at the shuttle, and the logo painted on it was indeed the Fifth Corps. Since the people inside and outside Yunluoxing are all from the Fifth Corps, then this shuttle can come here like this. It is indeed from the Fifth Corps. But Chen Ming has no interest in the Fifth Corps. Their way of doing things is completely inconsistent with his 3 views. Even if Whooping can't even stand up now, Chen Ming doesn't bother to pay attention to them. Chen Ming landed beside the road and found a ground vehicle that was hastily abandoned and didn't even turn off the engine. He drove the car directly to the airport, not paying any attention to the shuttle of the Fifth Corps on the other side. The psychic of the Fifth Legion sneered at the direction the car left, closed the door of the shuttle, and drove the shuttle away from the planet. Chen Ming drove alone towards the aerospace airport for about 10 minutes. The sky suddenly became brighter. Chen Ming immediately stuck his head out of the window of the car. He saw that outside the atmosphere, the main weapon of the offensive, the thermal pulse laser, had begun to accumulate energy. The red stream of light surrounded the muzzle, and in a blink of an eye, the thermal pulse laser that could take away the cruiser with its shield and ship had already swept towards the surface of Yunluo Star. It won't take long for it to sweep to Chen Ming's side. The main battleship has begun to clean the ground. Chen Ming suddenly felt a surge of anger in his heart. The people of the Fifth Legion just came to ask him if he wanted to join, and he refused. The Fifth Legion chose to clean the ground directly? Did they treat him as a human being? Chen Ming did not question it. Those people from the Fifth Legion who had cooperated with him before, these people had nothing to do with the main fleet. He chose to call the president directly. "President, how come the Fifth Legion has already started?" "Has it already started?" The president also asked back in surprise, and immediately went to confirm the news, and said to Chen Ming, "It was started by the Fifth Legion themselves. They said that their people have been evacuated, and they started to prevent the dimensional infection from spreading further." Started when they knew there might be living people on the planet? Chen Ming's questioning made the president feel a little awkward. He knew Chen Ming's situation, and knew that since Chen Ming was willing to selflessly help him deal with the dimensional infection, It meant that Chen Ming must be a good person. The Fifth Legion's current and previous behavior was obviously stepping back and forth between Chen Ming's bottom line. But sometimes, they have to make some choices after all. So the president still told Chen Ming the truth. When facing dimensional infection, even I actually prefer to solve the problem earlier. The threat of dimensional infection is too great. And for the Fifth Legion, except in Whooping, no one else is worth their second glance. The president was willing to reason and explain the pros and cons of a matter, and Chen Ming was actually very willing to accept it. He was never a pedantic person, but he had just seen the tragedy of the abnormal human world, and then in Whooping was targeted by the Fifth Legion. The two things together made him unable to suppress his anger. But he couldn't tell in Whooping's identity clearly, so he could only say indirectly, but they seem to be shooting in the direction of the power tower, and Whooping is there, right? The behavior of the Fifth Legion seemed to be a bit contradictory. The president felt this, so he simply said to Chen Ming, "Then I'll go ask." A minute later, the president came back and said to Chen Ming, "The other side doesn't answer the phone?" At this time, the flagship of the Fifth Legion fleet stationed in the orbit of Yunluoxing, the offensive-level command room. The captain of this offensive ship and the commander-in-chief of the fleet, Li Sheng. That is, the person who had been delaying time with Zhuijing's fleet before and brushing Zhuijing around. He was silently watching the offensive-level cleanup Yunluoxing. There was no emotion in his eyes, as if he was just giving an order to do a small thing. His deputy next to him seemed to want to persuade him, but Li Sheng directly stretched out his hand to block the deputy. Li Sheng raised his hand to block all the words that his deputy was about to say. Since he had already given the order, it was impossible for him to stop halfway. Moreover, I just need you to say that we did not detect in Whooping's biological signal, so it is difficult to judge that in Whooping died in the battle with the psychic of Zhuijing? The deputy felt a headache when he thought that in Whooping's death might lead to several forces, especially the Psychic Society and the two from the Odin Star region, coming to question him. If there was clear evidence that in Whooping died in the battle, it would be fine. He would have enough excuses to shirk the matter. But the current situation is obviously different. It was Li Sheng who ordered the opening of fire first. And in Whooping might have died under Li Sheng's order after the battle with the psychic of Zhuijing, which is the key. Li Sheng is the commander, basically only responsible for combat matters. But as Li Sheng's deputy, he naturally needs to be responsible for civilian matters, which means that he needs to face the doubts and questions of these two parties. The key is that the Odin star field is fine. Odin has participated in the Kayamo incident purely by shameless means, and their main appeal can be blocked. Moreover, the Odin star field has nothing to do with Kayamo in terms of location. The Fifth Legion does not need to pay too much attention to the forces of the star field that are not doing things nearby. But the Psychic Society is different. Although the Psychic Society has always been a loose organization, it has always kept pace with the Empire. There are some people who fish in troubled waters within the society, but more are psychics who are willing to do things that are beneficial to the Empire when necessary, that is, when their own interests are consistent with the interests of the Empire. The president of the Psychic Society can also be regarded as one of the top psychics in the entire Empire. Such forces cannot be sent away directly by anyone. In this Kayamo incident, the Fifth Legion can have the right to speak mainly because the matter has been made a big deal, and the situation is urgent and has to need the support of a legion. If this incident only happened in a few star systems from beginning to end, and the scale was smaller, then their Fifth Legion would not have any advantage at all, and it would be even more impossible to take away a certain right to speak from the Psychic Society. The Psychic Society can be prevented from participating too much. After all, the scope of the incident is too large, and the Psychic Society cannot fully control it. But the Psychic Society must be respected. The attitude of the Psychic Society towards Whooping is also quite friendly, which is completely opposite to them. Considering all these factors, the deputy said to Li Sheng in great embarrassment, "It's mainly because it's hard to explain to other people." Other people? Explain? What to explain? If the person is dead, there's no need to explain to other people. Li Sheng knew what the deputy was thinking, so he used the president's words to block his mouth. Do you know the warning given by the president of the Psychic Society? Whooping has experienced 2 dimensional infections. Each dimensional infection is equivalent to providing a coordinate for another dimension. Such a person may have some value if he is alive, and someone will protect him, but if he dies, no one will care at all. But as soon as the deputy spoke, he was interrupted by Li Shang with a hint of anger. Zhuo Jing's recipient died. His psychic effect was completely invalid, and the power of dimensional infection disappeared. All our previous losses and all our efforts were in vain. In the end, the biggest beneficiary was actually Odin, who had nothing to do with him. Can you accept this situation? The deputy was silent and did not dare to respond. Of course, he knew how much their 5th Legion had lost, and he also knew how heavy such a loss was for Li Shang. Even their main fleet had a certain scale of civil unrest before the trip, and no one could deny their misery. But why is Odin the biggest beneficiary? Li Shang pointed at his deputy's nose and asked, "Let me ask you, what is the biggest benefit we can get from this Kamo Star region incident?" The deputy didn't care about Li Shang's attitude. After all, he was used to it. He thought carefully for a long time and asked tentatively, "Solves Zhuo Jing?" Li Shang denied, "Solves Zhuo Jing will benefit everyone." Those research results published by Zhuo Jing? Our 5th Corps has unprecedented control over the Kamo Star region. We can rely on the samples left by Zhuo Jing in the Kamo Star region for research. Everyone has the research plan for dimensional infection. When Zhuo Jing published those things, he didn't care who could get these plans. We can't preserve those samples at all. In the end, they will fall into the hands of other forces. Whether it is the Psychic Society or the Fanchao Research Institute, they have the ability to snatch these things from us. And don't ignore one person, Hu Yi. There is a problem with his logic. It is obvious that his overall view is fine, but he is prone to make mistakes in some small things that Aunt Sue makes quick decisions. Most people don't do this. Someone is teaching him to do things behind the scenes. Hui was taken to another galaxy by Zhuo Jing before. Like in Whooping, he was used as a bait to distract our combat power by Zhuo Jing. The deputy said, "I remember that galaxy. Our fleet lost the battle in that galaxy and gave the entire galaxy to Zhuo Jing. The strongest person in that galaxy is Hu Yi." Before the psychic of Zhuo Jing was killed by Whooping, there was already news that the galaxy was recaptured. Who did it? It can only be him. Li Shang asked himself and answered, and commented on Hu Yi as if he was very familiar with him. The difference between him and Whooping is that Whooping will clean up those things that violate human public order and morality. This can be seen from what Whooping did. There was no Zhuo Jing alive in all the Zhuo Jing strongholds that he found, and no Zhuo Jing research results survived. Whooping's attitude towards these things is to clean them up completely, leaving only some paper evidence to prove that these studies have existed. But for Hu Yi, since he was able to cooperate with people who had connections with Zhuo Jing before, it is definitely not a problem to keep these samples on the Zhuo Jing space station now. And Hu Yi has never been removed from the Psychic Society. Do you remember how Hu Yi was on the Psychic Wanted list before? Li Shang also answered himself without waiting for his deputy to answer. Hu Yi took the initiative to assist in attacking Chen Ming, who has a close relationship with the president of the Psychic Society and is also the most outstanding newcomer of the new generation of the Psychic Society. He was not removed from the list. Think about the things inside. Li Shang said in a warning tone, "So we are not the only one who has obtained the research samples of Zhuo Jing. The power of this force, this is not our biggest benefit. Keep thinking." The deputy has already got the answer from what Li Shang just said. Is it Whooping himself? This time Li Shang did not refute and admitted, "It's him." A person who has just returned from disappearance, has no power affiliation, can lurk and endure, has survived 2 dimensional infections in a row, and killed the source of dimensional infection, and has the ability to kill many high-level psychics of Zhuo Jing in a row. Is such a person the biggest benefit in this matter? Think about how Whooping got here. The deputy quickly gave an answer with recorded content. After clearing out a Zhuo Jing space station in the Odin star field, he ran all the way to Kamo openly, was framed by Zhuo Jing on the way, and mixed with Zhuo Jing. After arriving in the Color Ink star domain, he finally entered the super space through his own body and came to Lucy through some kind of spiritual ability. After speaking, the deputy added another sentence. Only the last record is a bit blurred, and the others can be sure. Anthane, yes, he has helped Auden, and Auden also helped him. Come out for Anhwa. Auden quietly changed his place of peace before. Do you remember that Auden had become a joke before and pulled a felony 5th level spiritual ability to his own star area? We suffered the greatest loss and failed to gain the greatest benefit. There is a connection between Odin and Enwhooping that we don't know about. So where do you think Enwhooping will go in the end? Who can gain the greatest benefit? The deputy understood Li Shang's idea at this point. If he couldn't get it, then no one else could either. Although it's a bit bad, it's indeed a plan that can be chosen when necessary. But why don't we try to recruit Enwhooping? I tried. The deputy was stunned. How could he not know about this? Li Shang explained. I specifically looked for the people closest to Enwhooping. They are the ones I sent out to find the receiver of Zhujiang. You know them. The deputy felt his scalp tingling. How could he not know about the people Li Shang sent out? Each of them was a psychic, and each of them was arrogant and of poor quality. If Li Shang had not been helping them all the time, they would definitely have offended a lot of people. It would be fine to give them some combat reconnaissance and infiltration tasks. Giving them the task of recruiting civilians and asking them to find Enwhooping, isn't this a joke? The deputy was about to speak a few words to persuade Li Shang to stop whitewashing Yun Luoxing and send some suitable people to try to recruit Enwhooping. Li Shang's fingers tapped lightly on the table next to him. The deputy raised his head slightly and saw Li Shang's eyes. This look contained complex emotions. But the deputy could clearly see the dissuasion in his eyes, asking the deputy not to say more. And the deputy could also clearly see the deepest ruthlessness in Li Shang's eyes. He immediately lowered his head and closed his lips tightly. The situation was clear. It was Li Shang who deliberately asked those guys to recruit Enwhooping. Li Shang seemed to have some additional purpose. The deputy didn't understand the reason, but Li Shang had more seniority in the 5th Corps than him, had been there longer than him, and had made more contributions than him. As Li Shang's deputy, he just had to assist Li Shang in doing things. Questions should only be pointed out by him when Li Shang clearly made some fundamental mistakes. Now this is nothing at all. And when their 5th Corps decided internally whether to obtain the power of the dimensional infection released by Zhujiang, this proposal was the most critical vote cast by Li Shang. It was also Li Shang who took the initiative to ask him to take command and took the risk to personally support the battle. And he also sent important trusted men to work on the planet occupied by Zhujiang, which is at risk of dimensional infection at any time. It can be said that Li Shang is greedy for credit, but the danger that Li Shang faces is also real. Such a person will definitely not do anything harmful to the 5th Legion as a whole. The deputy looked at Li Shang with trust in his eyes. Li Shang also slowed down his tone of speech when he saw this. So this is no longer my own preference, but a problem of our 5th Legion. The loss is the greatest, the gain is the smallest, and everyone will laugh at us. I am also reluctant to do this kind of thing. Anyway, Enwhooping is a psychic who has extreme hatred for Zhujiang, which is good, but it's not good for us. His existence will make us lose prestige, so we have no choice. The deputy immediately felt that he understood something and nodded. Then let's do it. You go and handle this matter. If necessary, just pretend to be dead. Just get scolded a few times and it will be over. Learn more from those politicians. They are thicker-skinned than the armor of the battleship. As long as they are thick-skinned and do not violate the bottom line, there is nothing they can't do. The deputy completely understood what Li Shang meant, prepared to handle the whole thing, and turned to leave the command room. However, just after he walked out of the command room for more than 10 meters, he suddenly thought of a problem. What if Enwhooping is still alive? If such a psychic survives, wouldn't it cause more problems for their prestige? He wanted to turn around and ask, but in the end he didn't turn around. Li Shang always has his reasons for doing things. Before he ordered this to be done, he should have thought of various possible developments. Or he made a plan to make a certain situation absolutely impossible. He continued to walk out. Li Shang in the command room looked at the door that had just closed, but in his mind he was thinking whether he needed to change a deputy who would not have so many problems. While Li Shang in the command room and his deputy explained the reasons for his actions, Chen Ming was still driving on the way to the aerospace airport. However, the speed of ground vehicles was too slow compared to the speed of main battleships in space. According to Chen Ming's calculations, if he continued at this speed, he would definitely not be able to get to the airport in time and find a suitable spaceship to escape. If he chose to enter the insect state, his mental strength would not be enough to support him to reach the nearest airport or directly leave the planet's atmosphere. Digging underground, there was no way to dig deep enough to withstand the heat pulse laser. It seemed that it was really too late. Unwhooping seemed to be dead. Fortunately, the impact was not too great. Unwhooping was just a prosthesis after all. He was supposed to replace Chen Ming to do some dangerous things that he could not do personally. Death should be the fate of the prosthesis. Wait for death quietly and get a new one later. It was a pity for the fused chaos source in Unwhooping's heart. It was gone before it could be used. No. Speaking of the origin of chaos, Chen Ming suddenly remembered that there seemed to be another psychic power that could save Unwhooping's life. That spiritualization that passively transforms the body into a pure spiritual body when the psychic is about to die. Although his spiritual power seems to be insufficient now, if he accumulates spiritual power from now on and only transforms part of the body, he should be able to protect a small part of the body. As long as a part can be protected, such as the most core Zerg core that integrates the origin of chaos, that is, Unwhooping's heart, Unwhooping can survive. Although it is not known whether the protection of the prosthesis will affect Chen Ming's own spiritual state, how can he know if he doesn't try it? His ability to sense danger is not free. After Chen Ming thought of this, he immediately calmed down, stopped all actions that might consume his mental power, and silently waited for his mental power to recover. While waiting, Chen Ming suddenly thought of another thing, that is, his prosthesis at the branch of the 14th Corps was still on the phone with the president, and the communication had not been disconnected. So Chen Ming immediately asked the president a question that he was very concerned about. Who was the commander who ordered the cleanup of the 5th Corps? Why are you asking this? Chen Ming couldn't say that he was looking for an opportunity to retaliate if Unwhooping was not saved, so he immediately made up a reason and said, "Ask, Unwhooping has the same purpose as us, but in the end he was stabbed in the back by this person. I don't want to follow Unwhooping's footsteps." This answer is reasonable, and the president did not doubt it, and told Chen Ming the answer. A commander from the 5th headquarters, namely Sheng. He was supposed to go to the front line to rotate with the 7th Corps, but this time the 5th Corps was seriously injured. I estimate that the 7th Corps should continue to be stationed on the front line and wait for the 5th Corps to recover. The 5th Corps will definitely not run around during this period. You will have little chance to meet him. Even if he has some mean behavior, it will not affect you. Don't pay too much attention to him. Got it. Chen Ming wrote down Li Shang in his little notebook. Li Shang is in the limelight recently, so it is definitely not easy to target him. But as long as the heat of Kai Mo's incident dies down after a while, he will always have a chance to retaliate. He is in the dark and Li Shang is in the light. Let's put personal matters aside for now. Chen Ming continued to ask about the official business that the Psychic Association had to do now. How many psychics were exposed to dimensional infection this time? Will the pressure on you to prevent and control dimensional infection be too great? Don't worry about this. I have already made a lot of preparations. And those psychics are also aware of it. Their lives are their own, so there is no need to fill in for others. Many people were evacuated as soon as the problem appeared on Yunluoxing. The number of psychics who were not evacuated and really exposed to dimensional infection is not large, and they can all be checked. At that time, the list of these people will be listed separately, and we will find opportunities to manage them uniformly or disperse them. Just don't get in touch with things related to dimensional infection again. Don't worry too much about prevention and control issues. The number of people who can survive among those who have been exposed to dimensional infection will be much less than you think. Chen Ming interrupted and asked, how many psychics have experienced dimensional infection? There are more than 20 psychics at present. If we count the ones who may come later, the total number is expected to be no more than 40. Finally, there shouldn't be more than 20 people who can survive. Chen Ming asked in surprise, even the mortality rate of psychics is so high? Yes, it seems that many people have survived the dimensional infection, but their survival is only temporary. If they can't use their psychic power to completely protect themselves until they are out of the direct impact area of the dimensional infection, even if they relax for only half a second, the dimensional infection will completely penetrate their bodies. Even if they can be treated in time and undergo organ removal surgery, the survival rate will not be too high. This is because the target of the dimensional infection this time is the intestines. If it is other organs, the consequences will be more serious and the mortality rate will be even higher. These are the results of my analysis through the established data model, which should be similar to the actual situation. Chen Ming has never really understood how to improve the survival rate of psychics affected by the dimensional infection. After all, as far as he knows, he and the president are the only psychics who have survived the dimensional infection so far, and only the president will study this specifically. However, this did not prevent him from proposing an idea. Can cryohibernation temporarily prevent the spread of dimensional infection? No, people can hibernate, but dimensional infection cannot. Once a psychic is infected by a dimension, surgery must be performed immediately. A slight delay may lead to full infection of the organs and spread to other organs. The impact of dimensional infection has become serious. There is no difference between psychics and ordinary people. Chen Ming could not help but say, "It's like a special cancer. Cancer has long been conquered, and cancer cells will not get up on the operating table and fight with doctors." So this is another reason that limits the survival rate of psychics infected by dimensions. We don't have so many doctors who at least have certain psychic abilities and can use the equipment I designed to protect themselves. It's barely possible to use medical robots and ordinary psychics, but it is definitely not as efficient as specialized psychic doctors. So there are really few people who can survive dimensional infection. There is no need for prevention and treatment. Just as Chen Ming's 14th Legion's prosthesis and the president were discussing dimensional infection, Whooping had already stopped the car and was waiting quietly by the roadside. He kept gathering his mental power and preparing for the spiritualization. Of course, it is also possible that the spiritualization would fail and Whooping would be vaporized by the direct heat pulse laser. After all, the black fog psychic energy could be restricted by strong light, and it was unknown whether some life-saving psychic energy could be effective under the bombardment of the main weapons of the battleship. While Chen Ming was resting on the spot, some flesh and blood monsters were tracking the movements he made along the way and gradually approaching, trying to assimilate Whooping into their part. And in the distance, the red meteors that were enough to destroy a cruiser with activated shields were constantly leaving terrible scars on the surface. Chen Ming could even see 2 or 3 scattered shuttles that did not know which forces they belonged to were leaving the planet in a hurry. It was unknown whether these psychics who were notified too late and were definitely infected by the dimension could seize this last chance. Chen Ming did not care about them. For him, Whooping spiritualization was the most important thing. Just as his heartbeat gradually slowed down and he was concentrating his mind to face the impending danger, he suddenly saw a shuttle that was still in the air in the distance. It suddenly seemed to notice him, turned a nearly right angle, and flew towards him at high speed. At the edge of the open hatch of the shuttle was the psychic from the Odin star field who had chased Whooping all the way, Liang Fei. Liang Fei held one hand in the cabin and stretched out the other hand. A chain constructed by psychic fluctuations appeared from his palm and was thrown towards Whooping. "Hold on tight." Chen Ming saw the right moment and jumped up from the ground, stretched out his hand and grabbed the chain in Liang Fei's palm. The next moment, he was pulled up by Liang Fei. Chen Ming used the force to grab the door of the shuttle cabin in one breath and was pulled in by Liang Fei again. "Hold on tight." Liang Fei pushed Chen Ming, closed the door, and shouted to the command room, "Let's go." The shuttle immediately began to accelerate. If Chen Ming guessed correctly, Li Weiqi should be in the cab. They found him before leaving and chose to risk their lives to save him. Chen Ming didn't say much, but remembered this matter thoroughly in his heart. He cooperated and sat in the seat of the shuttle. Silently watched Li Weiqi driving the shuttle, moving forward and rising around the angle of the thermal pulse lasers and a large number of large weapons that were constantly sprayed by the offensive class in space. As long as there is no accident, The shuttle should be able to leave the firing range of the main battleship immediately. But accidents obviously cannot be diverted by human will. As the shuttle was rising, the whole ship suddenly shook violently. Liang Fei, who had been sticking to the window and observing the thermal pulse laser washing outside, bumped his head against the glass and couldn't help yelling at the cab, "Li Weiqi!" Li Weiqi didn't respond. Chen Ming was sitting at an angle that allowed him to see through the open cab door that Li Weiqi had turned his head and was vomiting. What he vomited was not only half-digested food, but also some blood clots and shaking tissues. His abdomen suddenly twitched unnaturally. Li Weiqi is not in a good state. Chen Ming unbuckled his seatbelt and rushed to the cab. The weak Li Weiqi barely set up the automatic driving on the operating table. He was forced to lean on the seat, his face pale, and he had lost the ability to move. He said slowly, word by word, "I seem to be dying." Liang Fei just entered the cab at this time and became anxious after hearing Li Weiqi's words. "Help me take over." He hurriedly patted Chen Ming's shoulder and asked Chen Ming to control the spacecraft. The automatic driving could not avoid the thermal pulse laser. At the same time, Li Weiqi was immediately dragged from the driving chair to the back of the cockpit. Li Weiqi lay on the ground, and the abnormal bulging of his abdomen became more intense. Something was moving inside. Chen Ming immediately controlled the spacecraft with psychic power, quietly overclocked the spacecraft, and quickly got out of the position where the thermal pulse laser could hit this round of bombing, and restarted the automatic driving tin channel that he actually controlled himself. When he went outside, he saw Liang Fei holding medical equipment to check Li Weiqi's abdominal cavity. From the screen connected to the equipment next to him, Li Weiqi's stomach can be said to be a mess. The situation is obvious. He was infected by the dimension, and the degree is very serious. It seems that if the operation is not performed immediately, even if it is delayed for only a few minutes, Li Weiqi may die before he can even leave the atmosphere. Liang Fei looked at Li Weiqi's increasingly weak life force and seemed to have sensed the result. He said, not knowing whether to comfort Li Weiqi or himself, "He won't die." Chen Ming suddenly thought of what the president had said just now. Not all psychics can survive the dimensional infection. Liang Fei's movements stiffened for a moment, and only regret remained on his face. But Chen Ming suddenly followed up with another sentence. "But he can, and there is still a way to save him." Liang Fei immediately turned his head and looked at Chen Ming, his eyes flashing with expectation. "What way?" "Go away first and prepare the medicine." "What medicine?" "All medicine." Liang Fei quickly stood up and made room for Li Weiqi to Chen Ming, and went to the storage room at the rear of the shuttle to find some emergency medicines they had stored before they came. Chen Ming looked at Li Weiqi, who was already struggling on the edge of life and death, and did not dare to hesitate too much, and his left arm entered the insect state. 3 tentacles of different sizes, made of zerg muscles, waved on his left arm. Li Weiqi had already fallen into a deep coma and completely lost consciousness, so Chen Ming stopped giving him anesthesia. The sharp keratin cut through Li Weiqi's clothes, skin, and muscle tissue on his abdomen as accurately as a scalpel. In his abdomen, the entire intestine had been completely deformed, constantly tearing the remaining healthy organs and tissues nearby. The nearby liver, kidneys, and stomach all had defects and obvious wounds. Blood was constantly flowing. Even these injured organs showed signs of infection and assimilation. Chen Ming frowned and probed his tentacles into his abdominal cavity, using the most violent means to cut off all the deformed and infected intestines. Just at this time, Liang Fei returned to the center of the shuttle from the back of the shuttle, dragging a large medicine box. Seeing Chen Ming's tentacles cut off the infected organs and forcibly dragged out the organs that tried to fight Chen Ming, he was anxious all of a sudden. It's not that he didn't let Chen Ming open the stomach. The fact that dimensional infection targets organs has long been announced by the president. Opening the stomach and removing the diseased organs in the early stage of infection is the best way to save lives. He is now mainly anxious about the environment. After all, Chen Ming, wearing an whooping skin, took the keratin grown by spiritual energy and directly opened Li Weiqi's stomach in a shuttle that has nothing to do with a sterile environment. Even if he is saved now, The infection may take Li Weiqi's life later. Don't worry, he won't die. It's just an infection. Chen Ming knew what Liang Fei might react to before opening the stomach and responded immediately. At the same time, his other arm also entered the insect state, and several tentacles extended out. At the end of these tentacles, a living, intact intestine is being constructed by some gray-green tissue fluid that looks a bit disgusting at first glance. This intestine is a complete intestinal system including the large and small intestines. It looks perfect, just like a copy from a medical textbook. Except that the color looks green. Everything else is fine. Liang Fei stared at the fresh green intestine for a few seconds, dragged the medical box to Chen Ming's side and put it down, and his tone was not as urgent as before. What else do you need me to do? Help open the hatch. Several tentacles flexibly swam between Li Weiqi's abdominal organs, relying on Chen Ming's psychic perception to accurately remove all organ tissues infected by the dimension and gather them together. Liang Fei pulled the hatch horizontally after receiving Chen Ming's signal. A strong wind rushed in instantly, and the cold and thin air made Li Weiqi, who was lying on the ground, turn several degrees pale. Chen Ming quickly threw all the organs infected by the dimension out of the hatch of the spacecraft. Before Liang Fei closed the hatch of the spacecraft, he threw a small ball of plasma to follow the organs and cremated them all in the air. Chen Ming cut off the appendix that the queen insect had added for some reason and connected the entire intestine into Li Weiqi's abdominal cavity. The tentacles followed the intestines into the wound, connecting the organs, nerves, blood vessels, and tissues together. At the same time, some tentacles were extracting samples of organs that had not completely lost their effectiveness but were only partially damaged. After obtaining the samples, the tentacles on ManhwaRecap began to secrete biomass with organ characteristics in the damaged areas to fill these damaged organs. Chen Ming reached out and took a syringe handed over by Liang Fei and injected all the drugs mixed with anesthetic and analgesic effects into Li Weiqi's blood vessels. Finally, Chen Ming took out a new empty syringe and made a tube of special bright green substance that the queen insect made for Li Weiqi after testing his physical condition. Liang Fei was a little panicked when he saw this color, but he still insisted on trusting in ManhwaRecap. The bright green liquid was smoothly injected into Li Weiqi's body, constantly repairing the blood and energy he lost during the operation and making up for the invisible wounds in his body. The tip of the tentacle on Chen Ming's right arm secreted a kind of silk thread that can be absorbed by the human body and completely sutured the wound cut by the tentacle. There was also a layer of biomass covering the wound to prevent the wound from breaking again. After Chen Ming did all this, he immediately looked at the testing equipment next to him. Seeing that Li Weiqi's condition was getting better on the testing equipment, Chen Ming finally relaxed a little. Liang Fei on the side finally couldn't help but said to ManhwaRecap, "You?" Chen Ming waved his hand and said, "It's just a little trick. This technology that pulls people back from the brink of death doesn't seem like a little trick." Liang Fei knew that ManhwaRecap's psychic effect was from the thorn zerg. He had looked up information about the thorn zerg. Although it is now close to extinction, it was once a creature that was indeed worthy of being an opponent of the Empire. It has extremely strong combat power, vitality, and various abilities that made the pioneers of the Empire suffer. It also has the ability to evolve to adapt to the environment and the extremely strong ability to use biotechnology to match the evolutionary ability. The ability to restore damaged organs that Chen Ming just showed is just the tip of the iceberg of the Thorn Zerg's biotechnology capabilities. Even if a person's abilities are biased, they will not differ too much. ManhwaRecap's ability in biotechnology is definitely at the same level as his combat ability. Liang Fei saw combat power, vitality, and technical ability in ManhwaRecap. Then there is another most important ability for the Thorn Zerg, which is reproduction. ManhwaRecap, do you have the ability to reproduce an entire swarm like the Thorn Zerg? Liang Fei thought it was hard to say, but at least there was good news. ManhwaRecap is a good person. After tracking ManhwaRecap for such a long time, Liang Fei saw with his own eyes what ManhwaRecap did, which made him believe that ManhwaRecap is a good person. So after ManhwaRecap expressed his attitude of not wanting to talk more about his spiritual power, Liang Fei would not dwell too much on the issue of ManhwaRecap's spiritual power because there would be other people to dwell on it anyway. Liang Fei was very cooperative. He reached out and pointed at Li Weiqi, who was in a coma next to him, and asked, "This kind of organ, will it have any sequelae or problems for people?" Chen Ming was still not stingy in answering these questions. "It shouldn't be. All my body is this kind of organ, which is stronger and more efficient. As for the intestines, probably it can absorb more nutrients from food power, and the nutrient conversion rate will be higher. The only problem is that it may cause weight gain, and the rest should be gone. In fact, I wanted to ask him if he wanted to replace other damaged organs with mine, but it's not easy to ask in his current state." Liang Fei subconsciously wiped his sweat. Although the technology of replacing bionic organs is now mature, and Wu Ping's rough method of replacing xenogenic organs is actually a bit difficult for him to accept. Li Weiqi should have similar ideas. Liang Fei was about to say something else. He suddenly realized that they were not in a good mood to chat and hurried to the cockpit to take a look. At this time, the shuttle's autopilot system had left the range covered by offensive-level firepower. It was flying slowly around the planet and could leave the atmosphere at any time. However, Liang Fei did not rush to adjust the trajectory of the autopilot, but returned to the place just now. Staring at the medical testing equipment, he saw that Li Weiqi's condition was gradually improving. His injuries were completely stable, and he was out of danger. Liang Fei finally relaxed completely and chatted with Wu Ping next to him. "In fact, we didn't know where you were before. Although you released a large area of plasma, we didn't find you near the destroyed power tower. We thought you were gone. The environment was too bad, and we had to leave. But before we left, Li Weiqi was still worried and said he wanted to look for you one last time. You will know later. I saw you there just when we were about to take off. How did you guess that we came to find you?" Chen Ming's hand gently tapped the gift box in the small bag he carried with him. "It's not a guess, it's just good luck." If he hadn't seen the scene that made him upset before and hadn't released plasma to clear the surroundings, the two psychics in the Odin star field who had no foundation in the operation might not know that he was actually still on Yunluo star and might not come to help him. He really can only bet that the spiritualized psychic energy can withstand the attack of the main battleship. Liang Fei didn't understand what Wu Ping meant, but he didn't say anything. He quickly changed the direction of the spacecraft and flew out of the atmosphere. On the way from the interior of the planet to the outside of the atmosphere, Chen Ming finally had a moment to rest. But he couldn't rest during the rest time, because even if the matter of Kamo star domain was likely to have come to an end, there would definitely be a lot of things waiting for him later. So Chen Ming wanted to take advantage of this time to summarize his gains in stages. Only by understanding his own progress can he make the most appropriate choice in the future. First and foremost, the most important gain. That was naturally the power of the dimension that Chen Ming obtained after defeating the recipient and relying on the recipient to finally pull him into the Scarlet Dimension at the cost of his life. This is a comprehensive improvement in psychic ability, so that Chen Ming's hands that transform psychic power to transfer anything no longer have the original restrictions, especially the Afterglow core. The blessing of dimensional power allows Chen Ming to transfer the Afterglow core at will without restriction. As long as his mental power is sufficient, a whole fleet of Yuhui can appear beside him at any time. Chen Ming's body does not need to stay hidden like before. Wherever he is, his fleet is there. He is the anchor point of the fleet and the incarnation of the fleet. However, there are two small problems with the improvement of psychic power. One problem is that the blessing of dimensional power has indeed been added to Chen Ming's psychic power, but the specific blessing requires Chen Ming to explore and adapt. He still needs time to adapt to this sudden powerful force. The core of his psychic power is not only transformation, but also repair and manufacturing. These two psychic powers will definitely have new changes under the blessing of dimensional power. There is another problem. That is, the blessing of dimensional power acts on psychic effects, and the improvement of Chen Ming's own mental power is not obvious. In other words, he has not yet broken through the limitation of only 9 cruisers that can be directly controlled at the same time. He still needs to work hard. When his mental power can break through to 10 cruisers, he may be able to control the battleship in reality without pressure. The difference between battleship and cruiser is much greater than that between cruiser and destroyer. As the president said before, a cruiser can be regarded as a level 4 psychic, with the ability to destroy a city alone. And a cruiser fleet can be regarded as a level 5 psychic, capable of destroying a planet. And the battleship that can easily destroy the cruiser fleet is at least the peak of the level 5 psychic. Level 6 is not necessarily enough. After all, the battleship is designed only for combat, not for orbital bombing of a planet, or the destruction of the entire planet. The destructive power to planets and galaxies is not strong. But this is relatively weak. In any case, the combat power of the battleship is extremely terrifying. Being able to control the battleship is definitely a huge improvement for Chen Ming, although his battleship has not yet been settled. But since he has already obtained the blueprints of the 5th Legion's giant dock and Yuhui's new star-level unmanned battlecruiser, then at least he has got the key to obtain the main battleship. If it doesn't work, isn't there still the mechanical race? Isn't the upcoming war between the mechanical race the best opportunity for him to obtain the main battleship? The mothership of the mechanical race is also a main battleship. But thinking about this is a bit far-fetched. Chen Ming still focuses on the present. In addition to the progress in psychic power, he also obtained some substantial things. 3 spirit stones. Obsession, fear, and resentment. Fear and resentment are both resonant spirit stones, and they are also spirit stones left by psychics after death. Counting the crazy words that Chen Ming could also resonate with before. It just so happens that each prosthetic body is allocated one. Fear will have to find an opportunity to resonate later. It's just that resentment. Let's talk about it. Since Zhuojing's vitality is seriously damaged, the Zhuojing in the dark will definitely not take this opportunity to show up and be beaten. It will probably take a long time to find Zhuojing's real brainwash psychic, and it depends on luck to a large extent. Although the training effect of the Frenzy Spirit Stone on him has gradually decreased, the effect of the new Resonance Spirit Stone may not be very good. But it is good after all. And Chen Ming still remembers that his Frenzy Spirit Stone was transformed from the Whispering Spirit Stone to the Nonsense Spirit Stone after it came into contact with a pirate captain who died with hatred. The Nonsense Spirit Stone then became the Frenzy Spirit Stone through the deformed flesh and blood infected by the dimension. This shows that the Spirit Stone is actually possible to grow. He has come into contact with the power of the dimension, and maybe he is still replicating the situation of the frenzy on the remaining resonant Spirit Stones. Moreover, after Chen Ming knew that he was actually a psychotic entity, he didn't care about bringing a few more Spirit Stones, because they would have some auxiliary effect in psychic training. In addition to the Spirit Stones, the physical gains were the 2 psychic captives. One was a black fog psychic who came to assassinate him a long time ago. One was a psychic who tried to stop him on the Zhuojing space station without knowing his own strength. The black fog psychic had been sent out of the Empire before. Although the psychic had been arranged by Chen Ming in the freezer of the spacecraft before. However, when Chen Ming followed Chen Yan to board the Zhuojing spacecraft, he had already used psychic power to drive the spacecraft away from the Empire. Now it is estimated that it should be almost at the main body. When the spiritual nerves arrive later, Chen Ming can finally try to extract the spiritual nerves from the psychic with the spiritual nerve extractor. Chen Ming found that his concept changed very quickly. At first, he didn't want to use these things on other psychics because of his own experience, so Yin Xiong was at least still alive. But later, after seeing what Zhuojing did, Chen Ming didn't care about what Zhuojing said no matter what means he used. Then, it was the source of chaos. The combat power and ability of the mind-running entity are needless to say. The things left by such an existence are of considerable value to Chen Ming. Not to mention in whooping. As long as you are familiar with the various psychic effects in the source of chaos, this source of chaos is in whooping's biggest trump card. The core of the necessary ability to make trouble and save your life. Chen Ming is not afraid of more and more psychic effects in the source of chaos. Anyway, in his opinion, he is the mind-running entity, and in whooping is also the product of the mind-running entity. The influence of the source of chaos on psychics is on the body. It is a variety of psychic substances attacking each other on the body of the psychic. Since Chen Ming can achieve absolute control over in whooping's body, it seems that it is impossible for in whooping to become a mentally runaway entity. Even if it happens, Chen Ming can just kill the psychotic entity that Whooping has become. It's no big deal to create a new Whooping with the source of chaos left after the psychotic entity dies. In addition to these gains, there are some other benefits that are not substantial and not his own abilities. For example, after going through so many things, Whooping's identity has been completely stabilized. With an identity endorsed by many parties, even if Chen Ming suddenly jumps out to question it at this time, nothing will happen. Unless Chen Ming takes out the evidence that he is Whooping. But he is not stupid. So from now on, Whooping is already a thorough imperial man. And judging from the behavior of the Odin star field, their ideas are actually quite clear. And Chen Ming doesn't mind. Whooping was Chen Ming's agent in the empire from the beginning. Of course, he has to develop himself and find the right opportunity to improve his identity. Now that his identity is determined, joining another force is of course the best choice to continue to improve his identity. This can be seen from the experience of Chen Ming's other fake body in the 14th Legion. Joining a force certainly has benefits, but there are also certainly limitations. For example, the biggest benefit of joining the 14th Legion is that Chen Ming and Bai Quan can communicate closely. All kinds of permissions and privileges can basically be obtained as long as you ask for them. Otherwise, Chen Ming would not have been able to arrange Whooping's identity so smoothly before, and he would not have been able to easily investigate the identities of many people. All kinds of equipment, including equipment like simulation equipment and equipment left by another civilization, can be used and obtained. Especially the catalytic core that has been studied recently, which is even better. As for the disadvantages, there are definitely some. That is, sometimes there will be tasks issued, and he has to do them. Although the tasks given to him so far are research tasks, giving funds, equipment, and research objects, he still likes it very much. But there will definitely be tasks that Chen Ming is too lazy to do in the future. Then there are personal restrictions. Of course, this may be because Chen Ming's psychic power is too exaggerated. As a result, many people will never be able to have enough trust in him. This is normal, but it's okay. Chen Ming had long been accustomed to staying in one place and just doing what he liked. His original body could stay at the highest point for several months without moving, and his prosthesis in the 14th Legion could stay under the dome all the time, and he didn't care at all. Not to mention that Whooping's performance was not as good as his, and the restrictions would not be too many. There were both advantages and disadvantages to joining a force. It was generally difficult to choose. But a prosthesis was a prosthesis after all, and it just required a certain amount of Chen Ming's own mental power and attention to maintain it. For a prosthesis, you can choose to join different forces. Anyway, his mental power is always improving, and the number of prostheses that can be controlled without the original body and other prostheses is always increasing. If there is a need again, just make another prosthesis. Joining Odin is definitely a good choice. Odin happened to be not too far from the Gallo star field, and not far from the Edge star field adjacent to the mechanical race. By joining Odin, he might be able to provide disguise support for what he will do in the future from other places. Moreover, Chen Ming was also curious whether there would be any difference between the government and the military in treating psychics. There shouldn't be much else to gain. Chen Ming sorted it out again in his mind and turned his attention back to the shuttle that was sailing towards space. Shortly after Whooping's shuttle left the atmosphere of Yunluo star, a formation of 3 frigates of the 5th Legion appeared in front of the shuttle. They asked the shuttle to slow down and accept their inspection. Even though Whooping's current spaceship was labeled with the logo of the Odin star field, and even though Liang Fei had obtained the permission of the 5th Legion when entering the planet, he still had to be inspected. This was an additional item that Li Sheng specially added to the president's requirement that all psychics leaving Yunluo star must be inspected, that is, to conduct a focused inspection of the spacecraft of the Odin star field. He couldn't let Whooping, who had a chance to survive, leave at will. As long as Whooping's whereabouts could be restricted, wouldn't such a psychic with only ability but no background be at his mercy? Of course, it must be said that it was to prevent the spread of dimensional infection and avoid giving people a reason to talk. And the spacecraft that came to block, it didn't have to stop the Odin shuttle on the spot. They just had to delay for a while and wait for other spacecraft in the fleet to come. When more fleets or cruisers come, Whooping will not be able to leave even if he wants to. Liang Fei certainly cannot agree to the Fifth Corps' request. Whooping had explained some of the situation to him just now when the spacecraft was still in the atmosphere. It is obvious that the Fifth Corps did not take Whooping's life seriously. Whooping must not be discovered by the Fifth Corps now, otherwise they might do something dirty. And Li Weiqi's condition is also a problem now. Although Whooping has stabilized Li Weiqi's injury through surgery, but Whooping just performed a simple operation, and it was performed in an extremely harsh environment. Whooping also said that it would be better to find a suitable doctor to check it out. Liang Fei certainly could not delay time for the Fifth Corps here. But there was no point in talking to a few pawns of the Fifth Corps here, so he directly called his superior. "Boss, the Fifth Legion stopped us from leaving." Liang Fei did not deliberately avoid Whooping, so that Chen Ming could also hear the voice on the other end of the phone clearly. "What exactly happened?" "We received someone. During the evacuation, Li Weiqi was infected and injured by the dimension. Whooping helped stabilize the injury, but Li Weiqi is not completely out of danger. We must leave as soon as possible." "Got it." The other end of the phone responded hurriedly, and then there was the sound of several people busy. Chen Ming could vaguely hear that they seemed to be going to ask the president for help. But the president had just been ignored by the Fifth Legion before, and he didn't know if it would work. Chen Ming thought about it, and simply called the president on the 14th Legion. A few minutes later, Li Shang, who was on the offensive level, received two messages at the same time. One message was that his subordinates found the spaceship of the Odin Star region government, and Whooping was suspected to be on the spaceship, and he had already caught up. The other message was an order from his superiors, asking them to cooperate with the Psychic Society to release the spacecraft from the Odin Star region. Li Shang's fleet must allow the Odin Star region to send out the seriously injured psychics infected by the dimension to the people of the Psychic Society, and the Psychic Society will also be responsible for the dimensional infection of the people on the entire spacecraft. This sentence clearly means that even if there are other people on the spacecraft, they will all be handed over to the Psychic Society, and the Fifth Legion cannot intervene. Li Shang could not sit still immediately, and he also took out the terminal to contact his superiors and asked, "Why give this order at this time?" "This is an order from the Empire, not my order. Don't do unnecessary things." Li Shang understood. This is because of the president of the Psychic Society. The Odin Star region had previously been in contact with the Psychic Society because of Whooping, and it was normal to ask for help in an emergency. The president of the Psychic Society had been turned down by his phone call before, and he knew that they had attacked Whooping when they had no way to win him over. So this time, he directly contacted the higher-ups. The president of the Psychic Society did have the power to snatch people from the Fifth Legion. After all, the technology for detecting dimensional infection was first developed by the Psychic Society. So it was a reasonable request from the Empire that someone like Whooping, who had experienced 2 dimensional infections, was specifically asked for. It was nothing to issue a not-too-excessive mandatory request to the Fifth Legion. Although it is said that a general is not subject to the orders of the Emperor when he is away from home, the orders of his superiors can be ignored in an emergency. But now the situation is under full control, and only the final finishing work is left. If you do not accept this kind of order, it means that you do not regard your superiors and the Empire as human beings. Li Shang could only frown and let his men let the people from the Odin Star field pass. After Whooping's shuttle broke free from the dozens of surrounding spaceships and started to accelerate again. The prosthesis of the 14th Legion also ended the communication with the president. Chen Ming came here with the idea of helping the Odin Star region to determine the president's attitude. He planned to take advantage of the coincidence when the president was asked for help to call and ask questions and confirm it indirectly. However, the president's attitude was quite clear, so he didn't say much nonsense, just listened silently. Anyway, the result is good. Whooping's shuttle broke away from the restrictions of the 14th Legion and arrived at the edge of the galaxy soon after. There is a Supreme Point parked here. This is not Chen Ming's Supreme Point. Chen Ming's 2 Supreme Points ran outside. This is the Supreme Point of the Psychic Society. When Whooping's shuttle landed on the Supreme Point immediately started, entered hyperspace, and evacuated the Lucy galaxy. Chen Ming, who had just stepped off the shuttle, asked subconsciously, "Where are we going?" Liang Fei, who had already stepped off the shuttle and was directing the people who came to pick him up to get on the shuttle to carry Li Weiqi down on a stretcher, said, "Hongamo and Kayamo next door have a lot of things to do these 2 days, but they have nothing to do with us. It is obvious that Kayamo's star region has been completely controlled by the 5th Legion. It is normal for people from Odin's star region to take the opportunity to run to other places." Chen Ming nodded, and then asked knowingly, "Does Odin have a cruiser coming this time?" "Of course not, it is borrowed from the Psychic Society." Afraid that Enwupiing didn't know, Liang Fei asked again, "Do you know the Psychic Society?" "I know a little bit. It seems to be a loose psychic organization in the Empire." "You can understand it that way." Liang Fei nodded, turned around and said a few words to the people who came to pick him up from the highest point. They disappeared around the corner of the spaceship, carrying Li Weiqi's stretcher. Liang Fei waved to Enwupiing and said, "Come with me. Let's go meet the president of the Psychic Society." "What do you want to see him for?" "To tell you something very important. It concerns the safety of you and the Empire." "Dimensional infection?" "Yes." It was not surprising to meet the president. After all, Enwupiing is a psychic who has experienced 2-dimensional infections. It would be strange if the president didn't see him. And there should be many people watching the process of Enwupiing meeting the president this time. Because just when Chen Ming was on the phone with the president also sent Chen Ming a meeting invitation link. After entering, you can see that the president is sitting at a conference table, and there is a screen behind the conference table. In this screen, the room of the other party who is going to talk to the president is temporarily empty. From the familiar decorations in this room, Chen Ming can see that this is the interior of a spaceship, and it is the interior of a spaceship that he is very familiar with. So it is obvious what this is for. As Enwupiing followed Liang Fei deeper into the spaceship, they entered the place where they were going to meet the president. Chen Ming also saw Enwupiing's figure on the screen of the conference room. And Enwupiing's perspective also saw the president on the screen on the other side of his conference room. The president was still wearing square-framed glasses and a white coat, looking very stable. After sitting down, Enwupiing and Liang Fei were the only 2 people left in the conference room at the highest point. It looked like a private conversation between 3 people, but Chen Ming knew that there were hundreds of people from various forces in the online conference room listening. Just as the president was about to say something, the terminal next to him suddenly rang. The president said sorry, temporarily cut off the sound on his side, picked up the terminal, and took a look. The president frowned, turned off the sound on the terminal, and threw it aside. The sound was reconnected and looked at Enwupiing. Although Chen Ming only had half a second to see the screen on the terminal, but he could also see that it was a call from Li Shang, the commander of the 5th Corps Fleet. Chen Ming took another look at the composition of the conference room. This conference room was built on the military system, and each participant was given an automatically assigned identity code, so the conference room could not distinguish specific identities. However, the specific sequence of this identity code can roughly tell which faction a person belongs to. Obviously, there was no one from the 5th Corps in the conference room at this time. However, after the call came, someone from the 5th Corps entered the conference room soon. But Chen Ming estimated that it would not be someone related to Li Shang, but other people from the 5th Corps who had previously cooperated with the president and Chen Ming himself. A little happy. The situation in the online conference room has not yet affected the conversation between Liang Fei and Enwupiing and the president. Liang Fei did not complain about the president's behavior of answering the phone in the middle of a meeting. Instead, he said respectfully, "President, thank you for your help. We have successfully taken Enwupiing away." "I saw it. Sorry to bother you." "No trouble." Liang Fei briefly exchanged a few words with the president and handed the right to speak to Enwupiing. This meeting mainly depends on Enwupiing and the president. The president looked at Enwupiing with a complicated look at this time, because Enwupiing is a troublesome person in his eyes. Although it can be confirmed that Enwupiing is a good person, he is willing to deal with Zhuijing and can deal with Zhuijing. But the 2-dimensional infections he experienced are too deadly and pose a great threat to the Empire. So no matter how they will communicate later, Enwupiing must undergo strict inspections, and it is unknown whether Whooping will resist. The president did not express these thoughts, but took the initiative to greet Whooping when he looked at him. "Hello, I am the president of the Psychic Society." "Hello, I am Whooping." The president went straight to the point and said, "I wonder how much you know about psychic energy?" And Whooping asked back, "What specifically?" "Dimension infection. I know about dimensional infection. Another dimension's invasion of us will lead to the situation in Kamo Star region. Wasn't it all in the news some time ago? A large number of newborns were deformed. Anything else? And that is the monster created by dimensional infection. I don't know much about the others." After knowing Whooping's general understanding of dimensional infection, the president did not keep him in suspense and said directly, "The most troublesome and terrifying part of dimensional infection is actually marking." "Marking?" "That's right." After Whooping asked back, the president started to explain in detail. But since the dimensional infection marking theory was originally a theory discussed by Chen Ming and the president, so Chen Ming didn't listen to this passage in his mind at all. Only after the president finished speaking did he control Whooping and pretend to look serious and said, "So what you mean is that my body is marked by two dimensional infections at the same time, and I am equal to two marking points?" "Yes, that's what I mean." "So, do you need me to cooperate with you in the research?" Chen Ming noticed that when he said this, Liang Fei next to him looked worried. Obviously worried that Whooping would be dissatisfied with this request. Of course, Chen Ming's attitude is very kind under normal circumstances. He never looks down on or disrespects anyone just because he has power. The president affirmed Whooping's words and said, "You can understand it this way. So what do you think? Put aside the research for now. I have a few questions to ask." "You ask. Does the marking really only mark the body?" "Yes, but this marking also includes your brain, so the means of replacing the body and bionic organs can be ignored." "Is there a way to detect it?" "Yes, and it's very easy to detect." The president gestured to Liang Fei. Liang Fei immediately took out a delicate instrument from nowhere, which looked like a watch, with a green light flashing like an electrocardiogram. He put the watch on his wrist, and the green light immediately turned yellow. Green means everything is normal. Yellow means it has been or is being infected, and red means the infection is breaking out. Then Whooping took another watch from Liang Fei and put it on his wrist. The electrocardiogram on it also turned from green to yellow. The president explained again, "So far, you are the only example of secondary infection, so we can't continue to subdivide it for the time being." "I roughly understand." "Then you can rest assured. I have actually avoided the mark of the first dimensional infection." "What do you mean?" Whooping did not reply, but wrapped the psychic wave around him. "I saw many tentacles growing out of his body, and a rough human figure was drawn beside him. Then these tentacles secreted a large amount of gray-green biomass, gradually building a new, identical Whooping." Liang Fei had already stood up when the tentacles extended and took a few steps back to the wall, with surprise flashing in his eyes for less than half a second. After all, Whooping had just demonstrated his ability to create organs, so creating a new person was just a repetition of the previous steps. After the second Whooping's manufacturing process was completed, the two Whoopings in the conference room said at the same time, "Because I have the ability to create a new body." He asked Liang Fei for another watch and put it on the newly appeared prosthesis, and the original yellow light once again returned to green light. Then, Whooping opened the chest of the first Whooping in front of everyone. He took out the heart that looked normal on the outside, and after gradually replacing the flesh and blood on it with new flesh and blood, he stuffed it into the chest of the second Whooping. After the whole process was completed, the watch of the second Whooping was still green. "The heart is very important to me, so I can't just replace it casually." This is what Chen Ming said deliberately. It is both true and false. The source of chaos carrying a large amount of psychic effects has long been integrated with the Zerg core inside this heart, which is indeed important. So Chen Ming would deliberately replace the entire heart, including the part of the Zerg core biomass inside, to preserve this heart. But if someone really believed this sentence, came to try to destroy his heart, and really succeeded, Then Chen Ming estimated that Whooping should directly become a completely mentally rampaging entity, and it is possible that he is still controlled by him. He wanted to see if anyone would make trouble later. If this is not enough to prove that I am fine. The second Whooping suddenly fumbled around from the first Whooping, found a few boxes, and stuffed them into his pockets. The new clothes were woven by Chen Ming using the silk thread of a moth-like gene and the queen of insects. Then the second Whooping put a box on the table and opened the lid. The spirit stone with a dark and twisted pattern like the stiff limbs of a dying person was revealed. Fear. Whooping pushed the spirit stone to Liang Fei, who sat back in his seat, and said, "Try it." Liang Fei nodded slightly, stretched out his finger, and gently touched the fear spirit stone. His breathing suddenly became heavy, and he subconsciously gathered his mental strength to resist this feeling of fear. He said to the president on the other side of the screen, "Resonant spirit stone. The target is Whooping." Whooping took the opportunity before the president spoke and said, "Is there any psychic energy of the association on the spacecraft? Let others try it too." At Whooping's request, psychics belonging to the Psychic Association soon entered the meeting room. After trying and confirming that it was indeed the resonance spirit stone, and the target was indeed Whooping himself, they withdrew. After getting the verification, Chen Ming did not waste time. He picked up the fear spirit stone with one hand, and a ball of plasma condensed at the fingertips of the other hand. The plasma was stuffed into the body of the first Whooping. Under Chen Ming's precise control, the plasma only burned all the organs in the body of this Whooping into charcoal, completely losing the breath of life. The fear spirit stone immediately changed, and the remaining mental power that constituted the illusion formed a resonance link with the new Whooping, allowing Whooping to completely control the fear spirit stone. On the wrist of Whooping, the display of the watch suddenly turned red. Before the dimensional infection broke out again on the corpse, Chen Ming burned the corpse to ashes with another plasma. Whooping proved that he could erase the sequelae of the dimensional infection for himself and did not need to be examined. The president was a little embarrassed for a while, so the conference room was temporarily quiet. Of course, the silence in the conference room does not mean that the online conference room will be quiet. Because just now the online conference room fell into a brief silence because of Whooping's mitosis. Suddenly someone asked, "Does this mean that Whooping can actually control two people at the same time? What about before?" Originally, a message popped up in the online conference room every half a minute or so. Just after this question, the whole conference room entered a crazy discussion. Even if the conference room turned into a vegetable market to avoid the confusion of voice communication, only text speech was restricted. But obviously, the text is now flooding the screen in the online conference room. Of course, it is not difficult for Chen Ming to see all the words clearly. Anyway, some people questioned, some doubted, and some worried. To sum it up, if Whooping has such ability, then the battle outside the power supply tower was probably directed and acted by himself, all acting. Whooping is actually a member of Zwajing, who assassinated the head of Kamo Star Domain. The president can see what is being discussed in the online conference room. Of course, Chen Ming has to solve this problem quickly. So in the silence of the offline conference room, Whooping directly took out a red and blue heart-gathering spirit bead and said, "I know what you are worried about. But I have said before that Zwajing has a psychic code named Thousand Faces, and this is the product of his psychic power. This is something that his psychic power has solidified, so it did not disappear when he died. As long as it is used, it can imitate the psychic effects of other people. Even psychic powers of physical mutation type are no exception. It's just the ability to change into someone else's appearance, not this thing. But I won't say what appearance can represent. Everyone knows the effect of plastic surgery." Someone immediately questioned in the online conference room. It can only prove that the man called Chimyan can change into Whooping, but it can't prove that he didn't assassinate him. With a series of reconciliations, someone immediately retorted, "Thoughts cannot slip, and no one who slips casually is a good person." Chen Ming also said a few words by the way. Whooping was able to run to Kamo openly before. Even if the situation is good at that time, he can definitely pass the Kamo border inspection as long as he wants. There is absolutely no need for him to massacre a space station first and then enter Kamo through Zhuajing. And if he is really an undercover agent in Zhuajing, if he is here with us and provides more information to Zhuajing's people, wouldn't it be more valuable to show his value? There is no need to assassinate the star domain leader. And Wuping also cooperated under Chen Ming's control at this time and said, I know that our meeting this time is definitely not just the three of us. There must be many people watching. There will definitely be people who doubt me and question me among these people, but I have a clear conscience. So, President, I voluntarily accept your comprehensive review of me. You can interrogate me and ask for information you think is valuable to prove my innocence. Of course, all of this must be handed over to the Psychic Association. I don't accept any Fifth Legion people to come to participate or listen. Chen Ming saw a person with the Fifth Legion identity mark in the conference room began to question An Wuping's words with dirty words. Then he was immediately kicked out by the administrator. It seems that some inappropriate people have also sneaked in. Since it's like this, let me also tell you my evidence. An Wuping said impatiently, I have studied some electronic equipment. So I recorded the whole process of Chimyan's assassination of the Star Domain Chief. It was deep underground where the incident happened. I left the record there. You can see what Chimyan did in that video, which should be able to prove that I didn't kill the Star Domain Chief. The president, who had been silent all the time, seemed to have received some news. He nodded and said, since it's this time, I'll also announce something by the way. The Star Domain Chief is not dead, it's just a substitute who died. The real Star Domain Chief has been sent to other places a long time ago. When the chaos in Kamo is over, he will return to his post. It's not that easy for the Star Domain Chief to die. It's just that the Empire needs to take advantage of this excuse to expand the impact of Zhuajing's affairs, so that it will be convenient to encourage all parties to clear Zhuajing in the future. Chen Ming was even quite surprised, because he had no idea about this matter. The president did not seem surprised. Perhaps he had already guessed that there was such a possibility. After saying that, the president gestured to An Wuping. I am just announcing this news, you just keep talking, we are listening to what you say. We will help you to make up the evidence you said. Okay. An Wuping nodded and continued. This little evidence may not be enough. But I don't think I really need to prove that I didn't cooperate with Zhuajing, because I did cooperate with them. They used the massacre of civilians in the space station to frame me and forced me to join them, and I stabilized my violent disorder with them and entered Kamo with their help. But obviously, I killed him. The top of our team, the 1,000 faces who disguise themselves as me, and a psychic codenamed John. I solved the dimensional infection, killed their psychic with brainwashing psychic power, and put all the troubles in the star field to death under the power supply tower. I don't think there is anything to prove, right? Who is the person who has done the most in this incident? If anyone still wants to question me, then please do what I have done first. At least you have to have the same achievements as me, right? Who are you to question me? Are you qualified? Chen Ming directly controlled An Wuping to start the map cannon. After all, anyone would be angry in this situation, and the online conference room was of course boiling. However, the president was not disturbed at all. Then do as you say, and let our Psychic Association conduct an investigation on you. An Wuping suddenly looked at Liang Fei, and Liang Fei said very appropriately, Can I accompany you throughout the whole process? Yes. An Wuping's meeting with the president ended quickly. The doubts about An Wuping's identity have basically passed, and it can be said that there is no problem. After all, most of his actions have reasonable excuses. Even if it sounds unreasonable or difficult to explain for the time being, it can probably be solved in the review of the Psychic Society later. Although An Wuping's last few words are indeed crazy, there is no big problem. An Wuping is the one who pressed down the biggest crisis in the Kamo incident. This is the consensus of most people. Even if someone opposes this, it is impossible to change this result. After the communication with the president, An Wuping followed Liang Fei out of the meeting room. After the inspection of An Wuping, it should be the main show of inviting him to join the government department of the Odin Star region. Chen Ming felt that he could hint in advance to pave the way for the future so that things can develop more quickly and smoothly. An Wuping suddenly said to Liang Fei, What will you do after this matter is resolved? What will I do? Liang Fei glanced at Enwupiing next to him and didn't quite understand what Enwupiing meant. He said, I should go back to Odin. What else can I do? I should be able to take a vacation for 10 days or half a month and then continue my mission. Enwupiing nodded and said with a hint of expectation in his tone, I don't know if I can have such a life in the future. Liang Fei turned his head completely around unexpectedly, but just as he was about to say something, the two of them had already arrived at the gate of their destination. Pushing the door open, Chen Ming saw a reception room that was simply decorated but not plain. Compared to the previous meeting room, this was obviously a more relaxed environment. A psychic from the Psychic Association came up to him. It just so happened that Chen Ming knew this psychic. His name was Xian. He had been assisting the president in his work, and he was basically the president's agent in the affairs of the Kamo Star region. Xian was in charge, so it was obviously a more private meeting. After getting to know each other, Xian took Enwupiing to sit on the sofa in the reception room. Tea was already prepared on the coffee table in front of them, and the tea leaves were fairy leaves. Using fairy leaves to entertain people, it can be seen that the attitude of the Psychic Society towards Enwupiing is quite good. Seeing that Enwupiing still looked tense after sitting down and drinking tea, Xian comforted him. We are just chatting casually, don't be too restrained. Everyone in our society trusts you very much. I can see that. Chen Ming can see it. After all, he is not just Enwupiing. The president did not express anything too obvious to Enwupiing, but Chen Ming has always been friendly to Enwupiing. Seeing that Enwupiing had no reaction, Xian continued to say to Enwupiing with concern, You don't seem to be in a good mental state. Did you lose too much in the previous battle? Do you need to rest? Not for now. Let's get started. The sooner we start and the sooner we finish, the more time I can have to rest. Okay. Xian was naturally happy to see Enwupiing's attitude. He personally filled a new cup of tea for Enwupiing, holding a terminal in his hand, and asked, Can you tell us where you were during the years you disappeared? What happened? That's a long story. Let's start with a bug egg. Bug egg? That's right. After saying that, Chen Ming began to make up a story quite smoothly. Anyway, in the background of the fake identity he made before, the bankrupt security company did have a group of employees who went out and disappeared without any traceable clues. And among the missing people, there happened to be the boss of the security company. His disappearance caused the entire security company to fall apart, and after a few years, there was no possibility of tracking it all. So no matter how Chen Ming makes up the story, as long as it is logically acceptable, it will be fine. Although there is absolutely no such person as Enwupiing in that security company. But as long as Enwupiing does not go with the main force of this security company in his story, it will be fine. Just make up a reason that Enwupiing was separated from the main force due to an emergency and there was no contact between them. Even if the actual situation of that company is really discovered, Chen Ming can have an excuse to explain. So on this basis, Chen Ming also plans to include the Queen of Zerg. This can explain Enwupiing's psychic power, saying that he was stimulated by the Thorn Zerg and awakened his psychic power, so he can mutate into the Thorn Zerg. There is another advantage to doing this. That is, when the mechanical war begins in the future and the Empire discovers the planet near the mechanical star field that has been completely transformed into a hive by the Queen, it can divert the relationship between this planet and Chen Ming itself and focus more on Enwupiing. Help Chen Ming distract unnecessary attention. Chen Ming can even selectively expose some of the Queen's abilities to raise the authenticity of his words to another level. Let more people really believe that the story he made up is true. That's it. A security company organized a group to go to a planet outside the Empire for security work. Then an important person in the company accidentally encountered the Zerg during a field work, causing the entire spacecraft to be destroyed. The story of a psychic who was forced to land on a planet full of Thorn Zerg and struggled desperately to survive. And one of the team leaders awakened the psychic power of the mutant Thorn Zerg at the moment of death and barely survived was completely made up by Chen Ming. After struggling on the Zerg planet for several years, Enwupiing finally escaped from the planet with the biological spaceship evolved by the Zerg. Xian was obviously surprised when he heard that the Zerg had evolved a biological spaceship, and confirmed within Whooping several times that he was right. Could this biological spaceship be false? This is a good thing made by Chen Ming's mother, the Queen of Zerg. It is also the first step for Chen Ming's spiritual power to extend from machinery to biology. Neo Xian originally thought that Whooping relied on a passing spaceship or other spaceships that crashed on the planet to repair and make a new spaceship to escape, but the result was very different from what he thought. After all, the concept of biological spaceships was proposed a long time ago, but because of the difficulty of manufacturing and research, and the lack of decisive advantages over mechanized spaceships, no one has studied this thing. I didn't expect that it could be made by the Thorn Zerg. How did they do it? Neo Xian asked, half out of mission and half out of curiosity. What is the specific appearance and structure of the biological spaceship? How did you escape using the biological spaceship? I don't know much about the structure, and it's not too accurate to say that I used the biological spaceship, because I can't actually snatch the biological spaceship from the Zerg. I just said it. I can survive mainly because of the mutation effect of my psychic energy that makes the Zerg think that I am one of them, a worker. If a worker does something that harms the entire hive, then there is no point for this worker to continue to exist. Neo Xian nodded in understanding and asked, "Then how did you get out?" "I rely on my ability to enter hyperspace with my physical body and make a jump."
What?
Neo Xian made a sound that was more puzzled than hearing the biological spaceship in disbelief. His body subconsciously leaned forward and moved closer to Whooping. Liang Fei, who was standing next to him with his mouth slightly open and unable to close, also pricked up his ears. Whooping's words didn't seem to be a joke, and he shouldn't be a joke, because he was in the Kamo Star region before. Outside the galaxy where Whooping's coordinates were announced by Zhuijing, a spaceship recorded a video. It was a video of Whooping in a mutant state, his body traveling in hyperspace, destroying any spaceship that dared to attack him. At the end of this video, Whooping destroyed a spaceship, was shrouded in the flames of the spaceship explosion, and disappeared completely after the flames dissipated. At that time, there were not many spaceships near Whooping, so only a few spaceships recorded this video. This resulted in an incomplete perspective of this video, and it was impossible to determine what happened after the last spaceship exploded. Whooping's inexplicable disappearance and his appearance in the Lucy galaxy a few minutes later made many people have many different speculations. And now, the answer seems to have been spoken from the mouth of the real owner. So how did they do this? Whooping saw Neo Xian's shock and curiosity, and he deliberately kept it a secret. Do you know the abilities of the Thorn Zerg? Yes, by eating the tissues of other species of organisms, the genes of the eaten organisms can be quickly transformed into their own abilities, and the genes of different organisms can be connected to each other to create more powerful abilities. As someone who had been scheduled to contact Whooping before, Neo Xian would of course learn some knowledge related to the Thorn Zerg, so he said this sentence very fluently. This is only part of their abilities, and I have seen more. Neo Xian's curiosity has been completely aroused, and he can't wait for Whooping's follow-up. And Whooping slowly said word by word, the Thorn Zerg can build a nest on a spaceship and use their biomass to continuously erode, devour, and assimilate the spaceship. During the assimilation process, they can use their own flesh and blood organs and tissues to imitate or transform into the appearance of a certain part of the spacecraft, gradually replacing the entire spacecraft. Replacing steel with flesh, this is the origin of the Zerg biological spacecraft. The jump engine was of course also transformed. So I found a way to obtain some genes from the biological spacecraft and created those special biological organs inside the biological spacecraft that should have belonged to the special equipment of the mechanical spacecraft and implanted them into my body. I used the jump organ to leave the Zerg nest planet and return to the Empire. This can all be done? Neo Xian really found it a bit unbelievable. The Thorn Zerg can actually use their flesh to transform a steel spacecraft and make the spacecraft their property. And Whooping can actually obtain the genes of the transformed biological spacecraft from the Thorn Zerg and install the transformed special organs in his body. This is really a bit too unexpected, too shocking, and too hard to believe. But only in this way can it explain how Enwupiing disappeared from which galaxy and appeared in the Lucy galaxy. At least this explanation is more reasonable than the fact that Enwupiing is actually a psychic with spatial abilities. Moreover, what Enwupiing said really described quite a lot of details. Unless all the details had been thought of and attached before, it would be impossible to have such a detailed description in a short period of time. So there is a great probability that Enwupiing really experienced these things. The Thorn Zerg really transformed the spacecraft into a biological spacecraft through assimilation, and from the indigenous creatures that could only exist near the stars, it once again became a terrifying creature that threatens the Empire. As a creature that once had a large-scale conflict with the Empire, the Thorn Zerg must be vigilant after it has the ability to threaten the existence of the Empire again. Neo-Xian's idea is very clear, but it has nothing to do with his current task. He only needs to be responsible for recording what needs to be recorded. Other things will be handled by others. As for the relationship between Enwupiing and the Zerg, Neo-Xian feels that it is not as simple as what Enwupiing said, that the Zerg regards him as a worker insect and the relationship of non-interference is not as simple as that. A person who can survive on a planet full of Zerg for several years. A person who keeps an eye on Zwajing as soon as he comes back, and who can grow from an ordinary person a few years ago to a person who can kill a Zwajing psychic who even an ordinary level 5 psychic has no stable confidence to solve. Such a person, on a planet closely related to his own psychic effect, only obtained some genes of the biological spacecraft and evolved a biomass jump engine for escape? He doesn't believe this. Enwupiing is fully capable of obtaining more from the Zerg planet, and he must have obtained more. It can be seen from the appearance of Enwupiing after entering the mutant state. He is different from most of the Thorn Zerg in the records, and he is going to be stronger. Of course, this is the privacy of personal ability, and whether to say it or not does not affect the accuracy of other aspects. No one will tell the pure truth in interpersonal communication. This is the basis of their current conversation. So it doesn't matter if Enwupiing conceals some of his own psychic effects. Anyway, the association will conduct a more detailed inspection of Enwupiing later, so it doesn't matter if he talks about it casually now. After satisfying his curiosity, Neo-Xian also restrained some of his curiosity and turned to question the psychic effect that Enwupiing mentioned. That is to say, if you want, you can jump directly to Kamo, there is no need to follow Zwajing, and there is no need to be so ostentatious in front, right? His initial ostentation was to attract the attention of others and confirm the identity background he had set not long ago. He followed Zwajing to see what Zwajing wanted to do, and by the way, tried to get more information from Zwajing's inside, so that he could take action against Zwajing later. It can't be said to be unnecessary. So Chen Ming immediately denied. That won't work. Jumping requires spatial coordinates. It's not easy to jump to a place I haven't been to. At least it has to be a star zone to infer the coordinates of other locations in the star zone. It won't work if it's too far away. Of course, it doesn't matter if it's a place I've been to. I understand. Neo-Xian continued to ask Enwupiing a few trivial questions and ended the Q&A on the background story. Enwupiing's complete identity information has been recorded, and the process of the missing years has been filled in. Neo-Xian's next question changed to the situation after that. That is, what happened during this period after Enwupiing reappeared in the public eye, including the relationship between Enwupiing and Zwajing, the process of defeating Zwajing, and other questions. Of course, Chen Ming also told all these contents truthfully. He even added a lot of information related to Zwajing. For example, during the process of Chen Ming sending him all the way to Kamo Star region, Chen Ming could remember all the places where he stopped and the spaceships he took. He could tell everyone everything. Later, Enwupiing told him about the process of his battle with Zwajing's psychic, his understanding of Zwajing's psychic, and the situation of Zwajing's Chen Ming and Zhan. Enwupiing could even draw Chen Ming's original appearance with the help of an AI-assisted program. Anyway, Enwupiing said everything that should be said, and Chen Ming never mentioned anything that should not be said, and would not give people a chance to talk about it. After finishing these things, Neo-Xian put down the terminal in his hand with satisfaction, and finally added tea to Enwupiing and said, "Okay, that's about it." He stood up and stretched out his hand to Enwupiing to shake hands, as if the matter was over here. But Chen Ming hadn't said he was having fun yet. He was so excited about telling stories that he even asked, "Do you want to check my physical condition?" Neo Xian smiled at Whooping in a friendly way and said, "That would be great if you want to, but there are not enough equipment on this spaceship. We have to go to the nearest base. You are not in a good condition now. Have a good rest, and we will talk about it in 2 days." Okay. Chen Ming agreed and shook hands with Neo Xian. Then he followed Liang Fei out of the reception room. But just as Chen Ming controlled Whooping to walk out of the reception room, he suddenly realized a serious problem. That is, Whooping's brain has no spiritual nerves. Just like Chen Ming's prosthesis in the 14th core. If this problem is found, it is probably not someone who will doubt whether he is a left-wing element, but someone who will doubt whether he is a human being. But fortunately, Chen Ming quickly thought of a solution. Because some time ago, Chen Ming and Gu reached a deal. Use a piece of pure psychic metal weighing more than 1 ton to exchange for 2 spiritual awakening nerves, a disposable device for detecting psychic effects, and 3,000 contribution points. If Chen Ming remembered correctly, Gu would arrive tomorrow. If the spiritual awakening nerve obtained from the transaction is implanted into Whooping's brain, it should be able to temporarily replace him. There is no need for the Queen of Insects to pinch a fake one without any experience. Chen Ming felt relieved and continued to follow Liang Fei to the rest room arranged for Whooping. On the way, Liang Fei suddenly said, "Whooping, you said before, you want to live a better life?" He mentioned the words that Chen Ming deliberately said before entering the reception room. Then Chen Ming must cooperate. "Yeah, you don't know how hard I was out there in those years. And after I returned to the Empire, I went straight to Zhuajing's trouble, and I didn't have time to experience many things properly." Liang Fei carefully confirmed, "What do you think?" "Same as you. I'll take a rest after the matter is over, and then find a job. I'm a pauper now, my household registration has been canceled, and my savings card and other things are gone. I can't always rely on robbing pirate spaceships and selling heads for bounties to make a living. Do you have any good jobs to recommend to me?" Chen Ming's words were already clear. Liang Fei, of course, also cooperated and said, "Yes, of course, we will talk about it later." After telling Liang Fei about his ideas, Chen Ming continued to walk towards the restroom. The restrooms and various dormitories on the spaceship are generally arranged at the edge of the spaceship. And Chen Ming also saw the porthole on the edge of the spaceship after passing through a corridor. Outside is the deep starry sky. When Chen Ming saw the starry sky, he suddenly noticed a problem. The highest point he was on had left the edge of the Lucy galaxy about an hour ago, but now, the spacecraft was still wandering on the edge of the Lucy galaxy and had not moved away from the galaxy. Chen Ming was puzzled. Then, Chen Ming used his own psychic power to control the spacecraft and saw that on the other side of the spacecraft, there was also a shuttle landing there. The first person to get off the spacecraft was Hu Yi. Whooping's fist clenched subconsciously, because stabbing Hu Yi was also what Chen Ming had always wanted to do. There was no chance before, and Chen Ming had also told the boss that it would not affect what happened in the Camo Star region. But since the Camo matter was basically over, and Hu Yi just came up at this time, if Whooping didn't stab Hu Yi, then Chen Ming would be sorry for his luck. Of course, Whooping didn't react on the surface at this time. Still chatting with Liang Fei, pretending that nothing had happened, he arrived at the room arranged for him by the association. The room was in good condition. As soon as Chen Ming entered the room, he could see some medicines arranged by the Psychic Society for Whooping on the table. Medicines to help restore mental strength, help meditation, or suppress violent disorder. He really cared about Whooping. After arranging Whooping, Liang Fei moved in next door, saying that he could go to him if he had any problems. Chen Ming directly put forward his needs. Just take a walk on the spaceship. Liang Fei certainly had no objection, and after giving Whooping away to contact him or Neo Xian, he let Whooping go. After Chen Ming confirmed Hu Yi's location through his psychic power, he controlled Whooping to take a step. He wanted to find an opportunity to meet Hu Yi, and Whooping continued to wander around the spaceship. Although he seemed to be aimless, he was actually approaching Hu Yi. However, just as Whooping was passing by, Chen Ming suddenly saw that Hu Yi was also invited into a room. Chen Ming immediately controlled Whooping to slow down his pace and slightly change the direction, going around to the deck where other small spaceships were docked at the highest point and the room where Hui entered. Make sure that Hui can't get around him and leave the spaceship. 10 minutes later, Hui walked out of the room he entered. Whooping also immediately moved over there. Soon he saw Hui, who was surrounded by several people and walking in the other direction of the spaceship, just with his back to him. And at the moment when Whooping saw Hui, he suddenly took a step back and stood at the corner. At the same time, he confirmed that there was a surveillance camera nearby that could record the situation at this time. Whooping subconsciously entered the insect state as if he saw an enemy, and his body suddenly grew to 3 meters. The corridor at the highest point is very wide, so this height can still move normally in the corridor of the spacecraft. But there is only one psychic beside Hui, and the others are ordinary people. Even if the power of the insect form is only to target Hui, the aftermath of the attack may hurt others. Chen Ming knew this before, so he just pretended and immediately exited the insect state. He used the insect keratin to make a short knife in his hand. Chen Ming swung the short knife in the way that the army used a knife learned from Bai Quan and followed quietly. To be honest, Chen Ming did not hurt Hui's confidence without entering the insect state. But due to the limitations of the environment, he could not change anything. So at least he had to try it, test some of Hui's psychic effects, and pave the way for the next attempt. Whooping lowered his voice, lowered his presence, and kept approaching. Ordinary people could not have discovered Whooping. Hui had been bragging to the psychic of the association beside him about what he had seen and done along the way, and he did not pay any attention to what was behind him. The psychic of the association was not very powerful, and he could not sense him at all. When he got close enough to attack, Chen Ming was about to take action. But Hui seemed to have boasted enough, and suddenly asked the psychic of the association, "Did you say before that you wanted me to participate in the war of the mechanical race of the Empire?" Chen Ming was stunned, restrained his action, and slowed down his approach. The psychic of the association replied to Hui, "Yes, the Empire has already publicly recruited psychics from the association and other organizations with psychics to participate in the war. It is said that as long as they have been trained for a certain period of time, a team will be built with psychics as the core to perform special tasks." Hui thought for a while and said, "But I remember that the Empire seemed to be reluctant to use psychics in the past. What was the reason? You can't let one person decide the outcome of a war." "I feel the same now. At most, it's just some small-scale tasks. It's meaningless to use our psychics. This time seems a little different, and this is just an invitation. It doesn't matter if you don't want to go." The two quickly ended the topic and continued to move forward. Chen Ming silently recorded this information. Continue to hold the dagger tightly and move closer to Hui. When Whooping came to the right distance again, he left a shoe print on the floor at the highest point. Suddenly burst out, bypassing the ordinary people who followed him, and stabbed Hui's kidney with the dagger. Hui had already reacted when the vibration of Whooping stepping on the ground was transmitted through the structure of the spacecraft. But he was now on the spacecraft of the Psychic Society, so Hui himself was not too vigilant, but just turned around slowly. And Whooping's short knife stabbed him in front of his waist at the moment he turned his head. The expression on Hui's face changed from vigilance to confusion and finally to sudden enlightenment. He waved his hands and retreated, saying, "No, no, no. I am the same as you. I am also an insider." Chen Ming ignored him and continued to stab with the short knife. But just when the short knife was about to stab Hui's body, there was nothing in front of the tip of the knife. But just when the tip of the knife was close, Chen Ming felt that his knife seemed to have stabbed into something, and a slight obstruction came from his wrist. Then the blade disappeared, and a burnt smell emanated from Chen Ming's hand. This is the smell of the tip of the short knife made of zerg carapace being burned to vaporization by high temperature. There was a transparent, invisible high-temperature area around Hui, like a layer of entropy armor. Whooping immediately threw away the half-finished dagger and made a new one. This time, the short sword flashed with the glow of plasma, which was used to penetrate the entropy armor created by Hui with psychic energy. However, Hui had completely released his psychic energy while Enwupiing was changing his sword. Although he was completely unable to compare with Enwupiing in terms of physical fitness, he was also unable to catch up with Enwupiing in terms of the strength of his psychic energy in a short period of time. The huge amount of entropy and the wall built between Enwupiing and him completely separated the two. Although it was Enwupiing who attacked Hui first, Hui was at least told by Wuan, so of course he could not attack Enwupiing in turn. And he also understood why Enwupiing wanted to stab him after seeing him. After all, in his opinion, only he knew that Enwupiing was a good person, and Enwupiing did not know that he was actually a good person. The psychic from the association next to him also hurriedly came up to stop Enwupiing and said anxiously, "No, no, no, Hui is fine, don't fight." Originally, Enwupiing could easily break free from the restrictions of this not-so-strong psychic from the association. But Chen Ming felt that he had almost no chance to hit Hui today. Hui was a level 6 psychic anyway. If Enwupiing didn't completely release his psychic power and had lost the first chance to sneak attack, it would be really difficult for him to have a chance to defeat Hui head-on. So Enwupiing went down the stairs, put away the plasma on the dagger, patted the psychic from the association who was holding him and asked, "What do you mean?" Hui breathed a sigh of relief and explained, "It means that you saw me on the left side before because someone was instructing me to do something." The psychic from the association quickly grabbed Hui, who looked like he might blurt out something he shouldn't say at any time. At the same time, he quickly turned around and told Enwupiing what he could say. Hui had a bad reputation because he was slandered by Zhuajing's Chimyan disguise for doing bad things a few days ago. But he cooperated with a psychic from our association a few days ago and infiltrated Zhuajing to help us do things. He is indeed a good person, and the president can guarantee it. Hui next to him nodded immediately and said, "Yes, that's it. I'm really fine. Don't just find trouble with me because you saw me and Zhuajing together in front. And you can't beat me, right? There's really no need for us to fight. If we fight, we'll have to pay for the association's spaceship." Enwupiing's expression immediately turned cold. After all, the truth is the truth. Hui's mouth is indeed a bit mean. And Hui didn't realize that he had said something with a strong sense of sarcasm. In addition, Chen Ming himself was really unhappy with Hui, and he had the idea of giving him another blow. Fortunately, Liang Fei and Niu Xian hurried over at this time and quickly stood between the two of them, fearing that Hui would continue to make trouble. Niu Xian also apologized to Enwupiing and Hui repeatedly and explained the matter from beginning to end again. He had roughly understood the situation on the way here and saw Enwupiing's actions from the surveillance, knowing that Enwupiing was deliberately restraining himself. So at this time, he knew what kind of action could solve the problem the fastest. And a communication suddenly lit up on the personal terminal given by Liang Fei to Enwupiing. After the call was connected, the president's voice came out immediately. "I'm sorry, Enwupiing. There are some things I didn't have time to inform you. I apologize to you first. Hui is indeed the person we sent to Zhuajing as an undercover. He helped us regain control of a galaxy and got samples of 2 research subjects from Zhuajing for our association. There is indeed no problem. I didn't notify you in place, so you misunderstood." People like the president took the initiative to put down their status and come to explain and apologize. It doesn't matter who comes here. So whether Enwupiing continues to attack or not. Anyway, there is always the next time. At least this time he already knows that Hui has a layer of entropy armor that should be passive. Next time he can target it in advance before taking action. Anyway, there are as many fake bodies as you want, so it's no problem to find an opportunity to stab Hui. Chen Ming has always been a person with clear principles and clear grudges. He will find a way to kill all those who want to kill him, and he has indeed killed several people. Only Hui's situation is special, because he didn't take action directly before, but only indirectly prevented the boss from helping, which was a stab in the side for Chen Ming, forcing Chen Ming to face the troublesome enemy in person. And later he took the initiative to reconcile with the boss, which also showed his intention to reconcile with Chen Ming and make compensation. So Chen Ming also made a reasonable handling of the hatred downgrade. As long as he is satisfied with the compensation result, he will only take equal revenge, that is, stabbing Hui in the back when doing something in return. It could be to trick Hui when possible like before, or to stab Hui physically. Almost the same. So now, Whooping put away his weapon, nodded to Nyo Xian, and turned to leave. On the other side, Hui, who was also about to leave, sneezed for some reason. He looked back at Whooping strangely, and then turned back again with some doubts. He seemed to sense a subtle danger. The source seemed to be Whooping, but it seemed to come from a very far place, so he was a little confused for a while. But he didn't care, shook his head, and continued to walk to other parts of the spaceship. Okay, let's go too. Liang Fei took Whooping back to the previous room. He confirmed with Whooping again if there were any special circumstances to prevent what happened just now from happening again. After confirming that there were no special circumstances, he didn't say anything, settled Whooping, and left. It should be to go to the hospital on the spaceship. Li Weiqi is still lying in the hospital. However, the association will definitely take special care of Whooping and Hui in the future, and will not let Whooping and Hui meet. Then for Chen Ming, there is nothing to do with Whooping for the time being. The only thing left is to wait until the highest point of the association reaches the nearest base. Of course, Chen Ming still has things to do. Because the president called and asked Chen Ming to help refer to the conversation between Whooping and Nyo Xian just now, what else can Chen Ming say? If he talks by himself, can he not know where there are problems that are easy to hear? Of course, finding loopholes in what he said before is one thing, but in terms of overall attitude, Chen Ming must show better attitude towards Whooping. After all, there is no harm in Whooping joining the association. Moreover, Whooping's existence is of great help to the research on dimensional infection. This is not just Chen Ming's casual talk, but Whooping can really come up with some things that Chen Ming himself can't come up with to help the research. The president obviously agreed with Chen Ming's statement, so I am also considering whether to invite him to join the association. Chen Ming asked back, but I remember that he seems to be interested in the Odin star field. So our association has always been a very loose organization. It sounds like the president's answer has nothing to do with Chen Ming's question. But the president's meaning is obviously that the Psychic Association is a loose organization, so most other forces will not mind if they join the Psychic Association at the same time. To be precise, since the government and the army do not mind their psychics having a background in associations, for example, Chen Ming himself has now joined the 14th Legion as an association. The Nyo Xian that Chen Ming knows is said to be a psychic under the command of a certain star field government, so other forces are not to mention. I don't think he would mind joining the association. Chen Ming said this with a strange mentality, and then quickly said, then after he joins, we should first study his psychic effect of clearing the dimension infection mark, right? The president did not notice Chen Ming's strangeness, but answered Chen Ming's question as usual. I don't think so, because Whooping is very special. He can change his body directly without any scruples, which means that his consciousness is likely not in his brain, but in his whole body. I even feel that his spiritual awakening nerve is not necessarily in his brain, but in his heart, and it is even a question whether it exists or not. Chen Ming was stunned. He didn't expect that the president could analyze an answer that was almost completely close to the actual situation from what he said just now. Is there such a thing? It's just a feeling. The president didn't say anything final, but his psychic power is definitely not simple and difficult to deal with. We still have to see how the situation is after the examination. Okay, is there anything else to do next? I'm talking about Kayamo. It should be gone. Kayamo now only has to deal with the aftermath. The specific investigation report and follow-up conclusions will be released tomorrow. Okay. Time went by in a blink of an eye, and it was the next day. Whooping was still flying, and nothing happened. So Chen Ming confirmed the follow-up of the Kayamo incident with the president early. Kayamo's matter was completely over yesterday, or in the early morning of today. It can only be said that after the Starfield chief of Kayamo Starfield came back to life and took over the control of Kayamo again, the efficiency of handling this matter was very high. The losses currently counted are mainly concentrated in 7-star systems. A Stargate star system, 5-star systems used as bait by Zhuijing, and a star system actually occupied by Zhuijing. The overall loss should be more than 400 trillion. Turtle. Chen Ming couldn't help but let out a shocked sound when he heard the news from the president. He only had tens of billions of funds in hand, so the 400 trillion was a bit exaggerated. However, after all, nearly half of the Fifth Army fleet had a civil war during the Kamo incident, and many foreign forces joined in, and the loss of ships was countless. There was also an industrial planet that was completely destroyed after experiencing a dimensional infection. In addition, a battleship was also sunk. Although it is still possible to repair, the cost of a battleship is not low at all. In addition, the entire Kamo starfield was blocked by the Fifth Army during the Kamo incident, and many spacecraft could not enter and exit at will, causing economic losses. All these add up to at least 400 trillion statistics. After Chen Ming knew the source of the loss, he even felt that the 400 trillion was a bit less. After all, it was a highly developed industrial planet located in a prosperous star field. But the statistics showed such data. He had nothing to say. Chen Ming also learned from the president about another thing he was more concerned about. That is, the matter of the Bennu star field. After all, after the Stargate of Kamo star region was captured, the Prometheus class, or now named Prometheus Mk.2, class battleship, came from the Bennu star region. To be able to transform the battleship, it is absolutely necessary to cooperate with the government departments of the entire star region to achieve it. Therefore, the entire Bennu star region should be taken down. But, just yesterday, the star region leader of the Bennu star region and hundreds of senior officials committed suicide collectively. It is not certain whether it was a suicide controlled by Zhujiang, or whether they woke up from Zhujiang's control and found out that they had committed crimes and committed suicide out of fear of crime. No one could have thought that the star region leader of the Bennu star region, who should have been fine, was dead, and the star region leader of the Kamo star region, who was assassinated as the center of the incident, was actually faking his death. But knowledge cannot be resurrected, and someone in the Bennu star region must go to control the situation. And the Bennu star region just had the matter of transforming the battleship to provide combat power for Zhujiang, so the Empire cannot be soft in its actions against Bennu. The military force closest to the Bennu star region, that is, the 14th Legion in the Gallo star region next to the Odin star region next to the Bennu star region, was directly chosen to take over the military control. It sounds strange at first. After all, the 14th Legion in the Gallo star region is just a branch, with not many people, and it is impossible to control the entire star region that may have problems. So in fact, this task is given to the 14th Legion headquarters. Just like the 14th Legion took advantage of the problem of its own people to build a branch in the Gallo star region some time ago. There are actually some problems with the process of building this distribution, but the 14th Legion is currently in its heyday, and it is also the main force on the front line fighting against the main force of Yuhui. The Empire turned a blind eye. The current situation is the same as before, because the Empire is about to start a war with the mechanical race. So the Empire needs an excuse to put a force with strong enough combat power near the front line. The star region near Bennu, which is not far from Gallo, is the most suitable place. The problems within the Bennu star region can be regarded as a test opportunity for the 14th Legion. As long as it passes, the Bennu star region may even be transformed into a garrison star region belonging to the 14th Legion in the future. Although it is different from the star region that directly belongs to the 14th Legion and directly provides material and logistical support for the 14th Legion, it is also quite valuable. At the same time, this can also provide the 14th Legion with a real-life exercise before the war with the mechanical race officially begins. Killing two birds with one stone. Understand the general follow-up of the matter. Chen Ming did not ask much. Anyway, Kaimo's matter was like this. Whether Kaimo would be affected by this and unable to recover in the future depends on Kaimo himself. It has nothing to do with Chen Ming, and there is no point in paying attention. He has other things to do today. Because Higu is going to visit the branch today to complete the previous transaction with him. Enwhooping may be inspected at any time. Before enwhooping is inspected, he must get the chilling nerve as soon as possible. Although the president said that he suspected that enwhooping's spiritual awakening nerve was in that special heart, it might not be in the brain, it might not be detected, and it might not even be there. But Chen Ming had to prepare. And at present, There were only 3 people in the entire branch who were qualified to receive Higu. One was the deputy agent appointed by Bai Quan of the branch, a major general named Jingxian who was quite old. One was the psychic stationed at the branch, whom Chen Ming had never seen until now. The last one was Chen Ming himself. However, the psychic was always missing and did not show up when Higu came last time, so he could not be counted on for the reception task. As Bai Quan's deputy, Jingxian was an old man who had been working with Bai Quan before, and he was also very busy after Bai Quan left. After hearing that Higu was coming, and that it was because Chen Ming was coming, he directly gave Chen Ming some personnel authority and asked Chen Ming to find someone to receive him. He had worked with Bai Quan for so many years, and Bai Quan trusted Chen Ming, so he also trusted Chen Ming. He didn't care that Chen Ming might use his authority to do something bad. So Chen Ming had no choice but to go and receive him in person. He had already asked Cheng Xinghai for leave yesterday, and now the time was almost up. Chen Ming stood up and opened the door of his basement in the laboratory and just saw someone trying to knock on the door. It was the researcher Lu Kong before, and now he had been pulled by Chen Ming to the position of a research team leader. Lu Kong handed a paper document to Chen Ming and said, "Director, this is the experimental data record file for the catalytic core. Please take a look. Just leave it there. I have something to go out today. Call me if there is any problem in the laboratory." "Okay." Chen Ming patted him on the shoulder and left the laboratory. He boarded the shuttle and headed to the main dome of the distribution. Before Bai Quan left, he had already given Chen Ming many permissions in many places. It can only be said that although Jingxian has the most power in the entire branch, if Chen Ming wants, he is the controller of the entire branch. Of course, Chen Ming would not be so excessive. He and Bai Quan still have a good relationship. He would not do such a thing. Not long after, Chen Ming stood at the spacecraft landing field of the main dome and watched a shuttle land here. The hatch opened, and Higu was the first to walk out. He greeted Chen Ming with a box in his hand. "Long time no see."
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.